Dexter in an orange jumpsuit, hands chained, framed on every news channel as the Bay Harbor Butcher. Dokes' body exploding in a cabin that isn't his kill room but becomes his legacy. A single Travis Marshall blood slide glinting in an evidence bag. LaGuerta standing alone at the docks, silhouette against the water, watching the currents that have swallowed so many of Dexter's secrets. Dexter Morgan, gun shaking, sightline caught between her brother and her captain. These are not 5 separate disasters. This is one failure unfolding in slow motion. One investigation that slips past Dexter's control and turns his entire code against him. When we talk about every single time Dexter's plan completely fell apart, this is the one that doesn't just threaten his freedom. It threatens the story he tells himself about who he is. Because the most dangerous enemy Dexter ever faced was not a rival serial killer, not Trinity, not Brian, not some chaotic monster mirroring his psychology. It was Mara LaGuerta, a career cop who did something almost no one in Miami Metro ever does. She refused to accept the convenient answer. She refused to let the Bay Harbor Butcher case stay closed just because the narrative around Dokes was neat, tragic, and easy to file away. So let's kick things off with the paradox. Dexter spends years perfecting a ritual. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. No witnesses, no evidence, no loose ends. He has Harry's code, a forensics job that feeds his planning, a dumping ground that erases the bodies. And yet the closest he ever comes to total collapse doesn't start with genius detective work or a dramatic confession. It starts with a tiny object he's been obsessed with since season 1, a single, out-of-place blood slide at the Travis Marshall scene. In this video, we're going to trace exactly how that microscopic mistake becomes a full-scale catastrophe. The central question isn't just how did LaGuerta suspect Dexter? It's how did a character many viewers underestimated or even actively disliked assemble a cleaner, more accurate profile of Dexter Morgan than anyone else in the series? How does the office politician become the one person who almost breaks his entire system? To keep this clear, each major section will walk through LaGuerta's suspicion timeline step by step, from quietly reopening the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation to connecting Dexter to the slice of life and the dump sites to baiting him with Hector Estrada. And finally, to that shipping yard showdown where Deb's plan for a normal life dies in the same instant LaGuerta does. The focus is not just on what LaGuerta discovers, but on the specific mistakes Dexter makes, the moments where his illusion of control gives way to panic, improvisation, and outright sloppiness. If any single beat in this chain shifts, the bloodslide is never found. The warrant doesn't go through. Deb hesitates for one more second in that container. Dexter is unmasked as the Bay Harbor Butcher, and the moral trajectory of the entire series tilts in a different direction. Because within our larger pattern of Dexter's collapsing plans, LaGuerta isn't just another close call. She is the failure that forces Deb to cross a line she can never uncross. The moment where his private code demands a public execution of an innocent woman. And the irony is brutal. The investigation that almost destroys him doesn't begin with a grand revelation. It begins with that almost stupidly simple clue, a single blood slide that should never have existed, in a place it should never have been. In the hands of the one person stubborn enough to follow it all the way to the end, that slide in LaGuerta's hand is the present catching up to a past everyone else already buried. To keep this clear, we need to rewind to the last time the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation ended and look at how neatly the system convinced itself it had won. We're back at that cabin in the Everglades. Propane tanks, Leela's fireball swallowing the screen, Doak's body blown apart in the explosion, surrounded by dismembered corpses and trash bags of human remains. On paper, it's perfect. The suspect who'd vanished during the investigation turns up dead in the butcher's apparent kill site, with the evidence literally wrapped around him. Case closed, monster identified, no trial required. The psychology of that resolution matters. Dokes was already the department's problem child, volatile, aggressive, openly hostile to Dexter, and suspended under a cloud of suspicion. The investigation had primed everyone to see him as dangerous. When the blast takes him out, the narrative snaps into place with almost mechanical efficiency. The media runs with the story of a decorated cop living a double life. The public exhales. Miami Metro, exhausted and under pressure, accepts the convenient monster. Why question the outcome that restores control? But for LaGuerta, this isn't just another headline. This is James Dokes, her former partner, her friend, the man she once protected and promoted, whose career she fought for, even when his temper made him a liability. We watch her at that crime scene and at his memorial, and there's a different layer under the grief. Everyone else is mourning a traitor exposed. She's mourning a man she never believed was capable of that level of calculated cruelty. Here's the central question forming in her mind. Even if she can't voice it yet, does the evidence really match the man? Dokes was impulsive, yes. Violent, yes. But a meticulous serial killer who stalked, dismembered, and dumped bodies with ritual precision, leaving blood slides like trophies? The profile doesn't quite fit, and that tiny mismatch becomes the hairline fracture in the official story. So while the season moves on and the department files Bay Harbor under heroic closure, LaGuerta files it somewhere else in her head, resolved but wrong. She doesn't have a plan. She doesn't have an alternative suspect. What she has is dissonance, a nagging sense that the investigation bent itself around the easiest answer, and that the consequences of accepting that answer are bigger than anyone wants to admit. From Dexter's perspective, though, this is the high point of his illusion of control. Dokes is dead. The only person who ever saw through the mask is gone. The official paperwork brands Dokes the Butcher, the media locks in the myth, and Dexter walks away believing his Bay Harbor trajectory is over. He thinks the code held. The cover story worked. His greatest operational failure has been alchemized into permanent safety. Watch LaGuerta at Dokes' memorial. The camera lingers. Her face isn't just broken, it's working. Calculating, replaying the investigation beat by beat while everyone else toasts closure. That's the first real crack in Dexter's supposedly airtight solution. And he doesn't even see it. And for years, that doubt has nowhere to go. It just sits there, buried under promotions and politics, waiting. Until one night, at a completely different crime scene, a single blood slide appears where no Bay Harbor slide should ever exist, and the dead butcher suddenly isn't so dead anymore. That buried doubt finally gets a target when we land at the Travis Marshall crime scene. Police lights washing the marina in red and blue, media vans stacked along the perimeter, the doomsday killer splattered against his own apocalyptic tableau. For everyone else, this is closure. For Dexter, it's another night where the plan worked, the code was followed, and the monster walks away clean. He moves through the chaos like he always does. Calm, helpful, in control. While Quinn fumes, Batista coordinates, and Deb tries to hold the entire investigation together, Dexter is already rewriting the narrative in his head. Travis killed himself, the case is over, the trajectory is reset. To keep this clear, this is exactly the kind of moment where his ritual is supposed to be invisible, folded neatly behind the official story. Because the blood slides are not a quirk, they're the core of his psychology. A private archive of every justified kill, each victim reduced to a thin rectangle of glass with a single drop of blood suspended in the center. It's his most intimate system of control and the one element that ties the Bay Harbor Butcher directly to Dexter Morgan. Same size, same shape, same chilling precision. So when he takes Travis on that church table, he follows the script: plastic, confession, knife, slide, stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room, leave no evidence. That's the plan. That's the fantasy. But reality slips in at the smallest point of contact, in the rush of Deb walking in the scramble to reset the scene. One slide doesn't make it back into the box. A microscopic rectangle of glass ends up on the floor of the church. It shouldn't exist. Not here, not now, not in a case that has nothing to do with Bay Harbor. And Dexter, who can track a blood spatter angle to the millimeter, never sees it. LaGuerta doesn't discover it in a dramatic spotlight. She encounters it the way real investigations actually work: slow, methodical, boring, along the way. She's walking the scene, watching techs collect fibers and prints, when a glint near a drain catches her eye. A small slide. Standard lab glass, but not standard for this crime scene, bagged by a tech who doesn't know its history and barely cares. For anyone else, it's nothing. For LaGuerta, it's a ghost. The central question hits her before she can explain it. Why is a Bay Harbor-style blood slide sitting in the middle of the Doomsday Killer's last stand? The size is identical. The cut is identical. The way it's been handled, the way it echoes evidence she logged years ago when she proved Dokes was a monster. And that's why this is catastrophic for Dexter. This isn't just trace evidence. It's a signature that was supposed to be buried with Dokes and the closed case file. If the signature is back, what else about that investigation was wrong? She doesn't log it. She doesn't announce it. She quietly pockets the slide, stepping out of the chain of custody and into something else entirely, a private war she intends to finish this time. LaGuerta walks out of that church with more than a piece of glass in her pocket. She walks out with a question that won't let her sleep. If the Bay Harbor Butcher died with James Dokes, why is his signature back on a fresh kill? Let's kick things off with the image the show barely lingers on. Late night. The bullpen is empty. LaGuerta closes her office door, blinds half drawn, and pulls a battered cardboard box from the corner, like she's dragging a ghost back into the room. Inside, the Bay Harbor Butcher. Crime scene photos. Victim lists. Forensic reports thick with jargon. And, buried under the paperwork, the original documentation on those blood slides that supposedly proved Dokes was the monster. From glossy photos of dismembered bodies to typed summaries of ocean currents and dump sites, she moves methodically. She's not chasing a hunch. She's running an investigation against an investigation. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on what the evidence says, but on what the department decided it meant back in Season 2. Back when closing the case meant promotions, press conferences, and a neat story about a rogue cop who snapped. Then she hits the discrepancy. The old slide catalog. Notations on size, shape, even the way the samples were labeled and stored. She lines that up against the Travis Marshall slide she just didn't log. Identical cut. Identical container. Identical ritual. If Dokes was the butcher and Dokes is dead, there should be no new slides. So who is copying a dead man's work down to the millimeter? Or, more dangerously, did they ever have the right man at all? This is where the psychology of power kicks in. As captain, LaGuerta's job is to protect the story that made Miami Metro look competent. Reopening Bay Harbor doesn't just question a closed case. It questions promotions, press releases, and the thin layer of control the department claims over its own failures. She knows the political consequences. She knows how fast internal affairs, the press, and the brass would turn on her if she announced we might have framed an innocent cop. So she doesn't. No memos. No official reopening. No paper trail. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern. When institutions refuse to self-correct, the real investigation goes underground. LaGuerta starts doing quiet pattern analysis, cross-referencing victim profiles, dump sites, and timelines, building a private case file that exists only in her office and in her head. Each major section will show how that off-book work chips away at Dexter's illusion of control. Meanwhile, Dexter relaxes. Travis Marshall is wrapped, the tableau killer is off the board, and he thinks his code has survived another season. He has no idea that someone he's written off as politically vain is reconstructing his entire trajectory, from blood, tides, and shipping records. How long can that gap between his confidence and her suspicion hold? Not long, because LaGuerta's next move is to leave the paperwork behind and test the Bay Harbor narrative against geography and logistics, starting at the one place Dexter always trusted, the water where he dumped the bodies. She steps out of the car at the docks, and for a moment, we're watching two different timelines overlap. Dexter's memory of black trash bags sliding into dark water. LaGuerta's heels clicking across the same concrete, file in hand, refusing to accept that the ocean really swallowed the truth. To keep this clear, we have to rewind to the original Bay Harbor pattern. Bodies dismembered, double-bagged, weighted, and dropped at sea. Coast Guard drags the water, finds a mass grave. From there, the investigation doesn't start with psychology. It starts with logistics, tide charts, current models, and, crucially, shipping lanes. Those bags didn't just appear offshore, they drifted from somewhere specific. In this video, we're going to treat LaGuerta's work here as the inverse of Dexter's plan. He thought in terms of ritual and code. She thinks in terms of routes and access. The Coast Guard models had already narrowed the probable dump zone to a corridor used by container ships. Back then, that was background noise. Now, with the benefit of hindsight and a nagging doubt about Dokes, LaGuerta rereads those models as a roadmap. She pulls Port Authority logs. Which vessels ran those lanes during the Bay Harbor window? Which berths they used? Which containers were offloaded at which hour? Each major section will line up ship arrival, container access, Miami Metro's work schedule. She's not chasing a face yet. She's chasing opportunity. We watch her at the terminals, surrounded by cranes, steel walls, and the echo of engines. She walks past stacked containers like she's moving through Dexter's unconscious. Tracing the path from kill room to ocean. Who could get here without a warrant? Who could park near the restricted piers without getting questioned? Who understood blood spatter well enough to avoid leaving a trail, but also knew exactly how these manifests worked? That's where the investigation shifts. The central question stops being, who hated these victims enough to kill them, and becomes who could move between crime scenes, the lab, and this port without anyone blinking. It's a small class of people. Miami Metro insiders, forensic adjacent staff with flexible hours, night access, and a reason to be near both bodies and boats. Dexter always believed the containers were erasers, anonymous metal boxes, endless water, a perfect logistical void. But logistics don't erase, they record. Badges are scanned, vehicles are logged, security cameras catch silhouettes even when faces are blurred. Along the way, LaGuerta starts to see that the Bay Harbor Butcher wasn't an outsider slipping through cracks, he was someone embedded in the system, using its routines as cover, and that's where Dokes begins to wobble as a scapegoat. Did he have the maritime access, the forensic knowledge, the calm, repetitive pattern of a man on a schedule, rather than a fugitive on a rampage. Alone at the docks, LaGuerta finally says the quiet part out loud, not as an accusation, but as a fracture in the official story. Dokes never fit this profile as cleanly as they all pretended. If Dokes wasn't the perfect match, then someone else inside Miami Metro was. If Dokes never cleanly fit the profile, why did the entire investigation bend itself around him anyway? To keep this clear, we have to walk through both the official story and the cracks LaGuerta can no longer ignore. On paper, the case against Dokes looks airtight. He's caught tailing Dexter off the clock. He has a documented temper, a history of violent outbursts, and a special forces background that explains tactical precision and comfort with killing. His family's tied to the very drug world the Bay Harbor Butcher is supposedly cleaning up. His blood is found at the cabin explosion. His car turns up near dump sites. From a distance, it all lines up. A rogue cop, a secret code, a vigilante trajectory that ends in a fiery collapse. But when LaGuerta slows down, the psychology doesn't match. The Bay Harbor Butcher is meticulous, ritualistic, forensically fluent. He selects victims, researches them, dismembers them, and leaves almost nothing behind. That's not just training, that's a compulsion, shaped into a system. Dokes, by contrast, is pure forward motion. He confronts suspects in public, explodes in interrogation rooms, gets suspended for crossing lines he doesn't bother to hide. Can we really map that impulsive, confrontational personality onto a killer who erases himself from every scene? This is where LaGuerta becomes dangerous. She doesn't just remember Dokes, she replays him. Along the way, she pulls old interrogation footage, incident reports, and personal memories into the same mental room as the butcher's kill pattern. The man who slams chairs, storms out of briefings, and calls Dexter a freak in front of the squad does not feel like the same mind that cataloged blood slides in careful rows and transported bodies with maritime precision. The central question stops being, could Dokes kill? And becomes, would Dokes ever be this quiet? And yes, she's biased. She loved him, or at least believed in the cop he was trying to be. But instead of blinding her, that emotional connection sharpens the investigation. Because she cared, she lingers on inconsistencies everyone else wrote off as closure. Because she knew his flaws, she can say, with terrifying clarity, which failures were his and which belonged to someone else entirely. Once that door opens, another possibility rushes in. What if someone used Dokes' obsession with Dexter as cover? His constant surveillance, his threats, his off-book tailing? What if all of that noise became the perfect camouflage for a different killer's plan? In this video, we're going to keep tracking that pivot, because it's the moment where Dokes' suspicion doesn't just condemn him, it becomes the raw material of the frame job. From Dexter's side, the irony is brutal. The more perfectly he framed Dokes, the cabin, the dismembered bodies, the convenient death, the more those details now read as too perfect to the one person who truly knew the man underneath the rage. Each major section will show this same pattern. Dexter reaches for control, and the precision of his cover story becomes its own red flag. LaGuerta finally lets herself articulate the unthinkable, but only to herself at first. If Dokes wasn't the butcher, then the real killer is still inside her department, still working cases, still killing under their noses. And once she names that possibility, she can't unsee where the evidence is really pointing. From that point on, the temperature at Miami Metro changes by a few quiet degrees. No alarms. No confrontations. Just LaGuerta moving through the bullpen with a different kind of focus, like she's replaying an old case in her head, while everyone else is chasing fresh bodies. We watch the shift through behavior first. She pulls Bay Harbor boxes no one has touched in years. She lingers at the board a little too long. She just has a few questions about the Dokes files, the boat slips, the blood slide evidence that supposedly died with him. To everyone else, it's LaGuerta being LaGuerta, using an old tragedy to polish her legacy. But to keep this clear, the investigation she's actually reopening lives in the gaps, in the inconsistencies that point away from Dokes and toward someone still in the building. Dexter feels it before he understands it. At first, it's mild curiosity. Why is LaGuerta at his lab bench again? Why is she asking about Bay Harbor protocols, about how the original slides were cataloged? He answers easily, because the code has always told him that cooperation is cover. Yet we see the unease creep in when he notices the pattern. She's not revisiting the case in general. She's revisiting the evidence only he would know how to manipulate. This is not a new serial killer leaving taunting messages. This is not a random witness he can discredit or disappear. This is a high-ranking lieutenant with institutional power, political instincts, and a personal vendetta built on the belief that her dead partner was framed. The central question for Dexter shifts in an instant. How do you control a threat that essentially is the system, rather than something outside it? In this video, we're going to keep returning to that pivot. Dexter runs the usual calculations. Could he kill her? Technically, yes. Practically, it's a disaster. LaGuerta doesn't drink alone in abandoned warehouses. She's surrounded by cops, by records, by a career-long paper trail. If she vanishes, internal affairs swarms. If she dies suspiciously, every half-formed doubt she's ever voiced becomes a posthumous clue. Ignoring her is impossible. Eliminating her looks like suicide. So he tries something unfamiliar, management instead of eradication. He monitors her questions. He checks which Bay Harbor boxes have been moved. He subtly redirects conversations, offers help, even feeds her small misdirections to keep the trajectory of her suspicion away from his name. For one of the first times, Dexter isn't planning a clean kill or a simple cover-up. He's trying to outmaneuver an intelligent adversary operating inside his own house. How do you stalk someone who shares your break room? And this is where his psychology betrays him. He underestimates her. He files LaGuerta under political animal, assumes her plan will be predictable, transactional, bound by optics. Each major section will show how that assumption fails. But the failure starts here, with his belief that ambition makes her controllable. He resolves, calmly, to keep an eye on her. By the time he realizes she's been reconstructing Bay Harbor step by step, she's already standing in his kill room, saying his name out loud. So when LaGuerta starts moving off the grid, Dexter barely notices at first. We do. We see the pattern: short, quiet meetings with men who should have been done with Bay Harbor years ago, old task force detectives dragged back into a nightmare they were promised was over. No press conferences, no official memos, just coffee, closed doors, and questions that don't line up with anything on her current docket. She's back in the archives, too, requesting old Bay Harbor files under pretexts that make sense on paper, but not in aggregate. Pulling marina records, rechecking dump site coordinates, asking Masuka about blood slide protocols in a way that sounds casual, but only if you're not the one who used to catalog those exact slides. To keep this clear, she's building a shadow investigation inside the official one, a second spine of data that exists mostly in her head and in whatever she can squirrel away without triggering alarms. The alarms still go off, not in the system, but in the room. Colleagues get confused when her questions don't match her caseload. Deb hears Bay Harbor and flinches. Batista is annoyed that she's poking at what he thinks was their biggest win. Others are quietly protective of the department's reputation. The story that Dokes was the monster and Miami Metro rooted him out. The focus is not just on truth. It's on preserving the myth that they already found it. Because reopening Bay Harbor, even unofficially, carries a political cost. What does it say if the department framed one of their own as a serial killer, closed ranks, and moved on? What does it mean for every commendation, every press clip, every grieving family that found closure in a lie? LaGuerta is not just challenging a case file, she's threatening to collapse an institutional narrative that keeps everyone feeling competent and in control. So the walls close in socially, side eyes in the bullpen, conversations that stop when she walks past, fewer invitations, more whispered jokes about her obsession. Along the way, the camera lingers on her working late, alone. Surrounded by boxes no one wants reopened. The more she pushes, the more isolated she becomes, until it feels like she's risking not just her career, but her entire identity as a team player inside this machine. Dexter notices that. He adapts. He starts monitoring her movements, tracking her badge swipes, eavesdropping on half-heard references to Bay Harbor. He listens outside doors, checks what files she pulled, tries to anticipate where her logic will lead next. His plan shifts from vague vigilance to active counter-investigation. If she's following his pattern, he needs to stay 3 moves ahead. But can he, when the very system he hides inside is now her weapon? Here's the structural irony. The more LaGuerta pushes against institutional inertia, the more she proves Dexter right about institutions being untrustworthy shields. Yet, she's using that same bureaucracy, those same forms and warrants, and chain of custody logs to close in on the man who believes the code is above the law. The central question becomes, whose faith collapses first? And she's about to stop dealing in abstractions. No more theory, no more what if Dokes was innocent. Her next move is a concrete test, a live experiment with a human variable. A man named Hector Estrada, the last living link to Dexter's origin story, and the bait that will drag this investigation out of the files and into the kill room. Let's kick things off with a ghost, not a metaphorical one, but a man whose name has haunted Dexter's psychology since before the pilot even begins, Hector Estrada. In the show's mythology, Estrada isn't just another file in a homicide cabinet. He's one of the men in that shipping container, one of the butchers who carved up Laura Moser in front of her sons and, in doing so, carved the dark passenger into existence. From a screaming toddler drenched in blood to a grown man with a ritual and a code, Estrada is the living thread that ties it all together. For years, that thread is out of reach. Estrada is locked away, buried under sealed records, lost in the bureaucratic fog that Harry navigated and then abandoned. Dexter's origin story is frozen in place, an unsolved trauma, an unclosed loop. And that's exactly where LaGuerta walks in. While she's quietly rebuilding the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, she starts pulling at old case connections, re-examining the shipping container massacre, digging through documents that were never meant to see daylight again. Keep this clear, the focus is not just on her curiosity. It's on the pattern she's chasing. If the butcher kills people who slipped through the system, then who would be higher on that list than one of Laura Moser's killers? When Estrada's name surfaces in those old files, LaGuerta doesn't just see a forgotten felon. She sees a test subject. If she can predict where the butcher will move next, if she can anticipate a kill, she can finally drag this investigation out of theory and into handcuffs. From Dexter's side, the timing feels almost supernatural. The man who birthed his dark passenger is suddenly being moved discussed, made accessible. This isn't an abstract monster or a seasonal antagonist. Estrada is the original sin, the one Harry never let him address, the unfinished business that makes the code feel incomplete. Is it any surprise Dexter reads this as fate rather than a trap? That convergence is what makes this stretch of the season so volatile. LaGuerta is methodically charting the Bay Harbor Butcher's trajectory, trying to prove that Dokes was a victim and the real killer is still operating. Dexter is chasing emotional closure, convinced that killing Estrada will finally give him control over the story that started in that container. Same target, different motives, completely incompatible outcomes. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between intention and consequence. Here, it crystallizes around one man. LaGuerta thinks Estrada will expose the butcher's pattern. Dexter thinks Estrada will heal the wound that made the butcher necessary. Neither of them understands that the other is closing in on the same point. And that's the real cliff. In Dexter's mind, Estrada is bait for his own justice. But in LaGuerta's investigation, he's about to become bait for something much bigger. When those two plans collide around the same terrified man in the dark, Dexter's carefully managed world won't just bend. It will start to unravel in ways he can't walk back. Because from Dexter's angle, this is where everything finally lines up. Estrada isn't just another target. He's the man who stood in the shipping container while Dexter's mother bled out on plastic. In Dexter's psychology, that makes him both a loose end and an origin point. If he can control this man's death, can he rewrite the story of his own birth as a killer? Let's kick things off with the mechanics. Dexter picks the shipping yard for a reason. It's remote at night, familiar from his work with the police, and laced with hiding spots he's already mapped during the Bay Harbor Butcher era. He times the extraction from prison to coincide with gaps in LaGuerta's surveillance, engineering a release that looks like bureaucratic noise. On paper, it's clean. Estrada disappears into the same kind of industrial nowhere that created Dexter in the first place. To keep this clear, Dexter's plan follows his classic triad: lure, isolate, eliminate. He stages a meeting that promises Estrada leverage, then routes him into a dead zone between containers where sound won't carry and sightlines are broken. The plastic is ready. The tools are prepared. The boat is waiting to receive one more neatly wrapped body. Every step is a callback to a system that, in Dexter's mind, has never truly failed him. But the focus is not just on logistics. Emotionally, this is Dexter trying to collapse decades of trauma into a single act of controlled violence. He talks himself through it as justice, as closure, as an elegant convergence of Harry's code and personal revenge. How often does he get to kill someone who is both a confirmed murderer and a direct architect of his own nightmares? In his internal monologue, this isn't a risk. It's destiny finally cooperating. That confidence is the real danger. Along the way, we hear the way he frames the operation. LaGuerta's investigation is a background annoyance, Deb is a variable he believes he can manage, and Estrada is the central question to be answered with a knife. Dexter believes he's anticipated every angle. Controlled environment, no random witnesses, a disposal method that has erased dozens of men without a trace. What could possibly intrude on that? The blind spot is that he's not the only one building a scenario around Estrada. While Dexter treats the man as a symbol of his past, LaGuerta treats him as a live test of her present theory. She's tracking the same movements, reading the same gaps, but through the lens of an investigation, not a kill room blueprint. Dexter's plan doesn't account for another planner, and that's the pattern of hubris we've been tracing all along. Each major section will show us this same beat, the moment before impact. when Dexter believes the variables are locked and the trajectory is fixed. Here, the shipping yard isn't just a trap for Estrada. It's a stage being lit, piece by piece. For LaGuerta to walk in and watch the Bay Harbor Butcher at work, the lights in the shipping yard are wrong from the start. Too bright, too exposed. Yet Dexter steps into that container with the same quiet confidence we've seen 100 times. Plastic already hung, tools laid out in clinical rows, Estrada bound and gagged, exactly where the plan says he should be. For a moment, it feels like Dexter has wrestled the chaos back under control. Stalk the target, confirm the victim, prepare the kill room. This is the ritual that's supposed to guarantee order. Here, Dexter believes he's closing a loop that began with his mother's murder and the code Harry built on top of that trauma. Estrada isn't just another name on a slide. He's a foundational ghost. Remove him, and Dexter thinks he can cleanly sever a thread that LaGuerta has started tugging through her investigation. But while Dexter is arranging plastic, LaGuerta is arranging facts. She's pulled Estrada's old case files, traced his parole irregularities, and realized someone with power is moving this man like a chess piece. To keep this clear, LaGuerta doesn't know the full shape of the monster yet, but she knows one thing. Wherever Estrada is suddenly being transferred, the Bay Harbor Butcher's trajectory might intersect. The rupture arrives as sound, not sight. A car door slamming outside the container, the low grind of tires over gravel, then the faint, unmistakable crackle of a police radio. Dexter freezes mid-ritual, knife still clean, plastic still pristine. This is the moment when the fantasy of total control shatters. Who else could be here, at this exact dock, at this exact time, if not LaGuerta following her own plan? In this video, we're going to keep coming back to these microseconds where Dexter's psychology has to flip from hunter to cornered animal. He recalculates instantly. The code says finish the kill, survival says vanish. And the new variable is worse than any serial target, a decorated captain who already suspects him, walking straight toward a fully prepped kill room with a living witness. From LaGuerta's perspective, this is confirmation and confusion layered together. She tracks Estrada's signal, follows the breadcrumbs of forged transfer orders and unexplained routing, and arrives at a dark container that should be empty. What is she expecting to find? Maybe Estrada hiding? Maybe a dirty cop? But not Dexter Morgan, half a step away from his ritual, forced to improvise. The collapse of the plan is immediate and total. Dexter can't kill Estrada without exposing himself. He can't let LaGuerta see the plastic and the tools without exposing the Bay Harbor pattern. So he does something the ritual is never designed for. He unravels it, cuts Estrada loose, scrambles the room, tries to flip the scene into a messy, explainable near ambush instead of a meticulous execution. Along the way, though, LaGuerta sees too much. The timing, the location, the way Dexter just happens to be present when her bait goes missing. Even as he slips out of immediate exposure, the damage is locked in. LaGuerta now has more than old slides and dusty files. She has a live, unfolding event that tells her the central question has been answered. The Bay Harbor Butcher isn't a closed case. He's active, adaptive, and standing right in front of her. And Dexter, for the first time in this season-long chess match, is playing from behind. The next move will not be his alone. LaGuerta walks away from that shipping yard with more than a scare. She walks away with a pattern. Estrada vanishes into the dark. Dexter's kill room evaporates into chaos, and LaGuerta is left holding a partial glimpse of something that should not exist in a random drug rip-off. Plastic, isolation, and a cop she already suspects, standing in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. From a panicked Estrada screaming that someone is trying to kill him. To LaGuerta catching sight of Dexter near the containers, to the abrupt shutdown of the operation once Deb crashes the scene, nothing about this feels like coincidence. It feels staged. It feels like an aborted ritual. And for LaGuerta, who has been quietly reconstructing the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation from the Travis Marshall bloodslide onward, this failed kill doesn't stand alone. It clicks into a pre-existing grid. To keep this clear, we have to track her logic, not Dexter's. She already knows the Bay Harbor victims were wrapped, transported, and dumped with meticulous control. She already connected the marina records, the slice of life, and Dexter's uncanny proximity to multiple dump sites. Now she looks at the Estrada fiasco and asks the central question: why is one of Dexter's mother's killers disappearing in a shipping yard, under suspicious circumstances, while Dexter just happens to be nearby? The details gnaw at her. The choice of location, away from witnesses but close to water, the way Estrada was lured out of prison on a convenient furlough. The half-built scene LaGuerta stumbles into, with hints of restraint and preparation that don't match a spontaneous hit or a cartel execution. This is not how normal criminals operate. This is how someone with a code operates. Someone who plans the environment as carefully as the murder. In that moment, LaGuerta's internal dial shifts. She's no longer asking, did we get the wrong man with Dokes? She's thinking, the real Butcher is still active. He just tried to eliminate one of my leads, and he's hiding in plain sight inside my department. Suspicion becomes functional certainty. The investigation stops being about ghosts and becomes about a living predator. Meanwhile, Dexter's plan has clearly failed. Estrada is alive. He's seen Dexter's face. He can connect Dexter to his mother's slaughter. And on the other side of that same night, LaGuerta is no longer just a background threat. She's an active hunter who has witnessed his operational world almost fully exposed. Dexter is juggling damage control on two fronts, and for a man obsessed with control, this is the beginning of a psychological collapse. In this video, we're going to keep watching how that collapse accelerates. Each major section will show LaGuerta tightening her net, connecting Dexter's odd absences, his forensics access, and his presence at key scenes to both the old Bay Harbor files and fresh anomalies like Estrada. By the time she's done aligning theory, evidence, and that near-miss kill, there's only one move left: design a trap aimed not at a generic suspect, but at Dexter Morgan specifically. And when a cop builds a scenario around his exact patterns, where can he run? LaGuerta doesn't just have a theory now, she has a profile. In her mind, the Bay Harbor Butcher isn't a wild vigilante or a rage killer. He's an orderly presence. Forensically fluent, methodical to the point of ritual. Someone who knows how evidence is born, how it travels through an investigation, and how to make it quietly disappear. She looks at the bloodslide from Travis Marshall's scene, then back at the old Bay Harbor files. Same size, same glass, same microscopic arrogance. The central question stops being who could have framed Dokes and becomes who at Miami Metro could replicate this, down to the last sterile detail. From there, Dexter's trajectory is less a hunch and more a mathematical answer. To keep this clear, LaGuerta's next move is not to keep chasing the past. It's to build a future scenario the real Butcher can't ignore. Conceptually, the plan is simple and brutal. Identify a high-value target that matches his psychology, engineer a situation where that target is exposed, and then lock down the environment tightly enough that whoever moves in for the kill reveals themselves. Control the stage, catch the actor. Hector Estrada becomes that stage. One of the men who butchered Dexter's mother, a living embodiment of the kind of deserving monster Harry's code would greenlight. LaGuerta doesn't know the full childhood trauma yet, but she can see the pattern in Dexter's known cases and Bay Harbor victims, predators, abusers, men who slip the system. Put Estrada in motion, and if Dexter is the butcher, he almost has to respond. How could he walk away from the man who started it all? But she's not reckless. Officially, she toys with the idea of a sanctioned sting, paperwork, surveillance teams, backup on every corner. Unofficially, she knows that once the wider department smells Bay Harbor reopening, the leak risk explodes, and Dexter's forensic awareness gives him time to adapt. So she weighs it. Visibility versus secrecy. Backup versus purity of the trap. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this exact tension. The more control someone thinks they have, the more blind they become to the angle they didn't cover. LaGuerta leans toward covert setups, quietly moving Estrada, quietly narrowing the circle of people who know. It's sophisticated thinking. She's no longer just stacking evidence. She's modeling a killer's compulsions and planning around them, assuming that his need to complete the pattern will override his caution. And she's almost right. From Dexter's angle, though, the air changes. Cases don't just appear anymore. They feel arranged. Parolee hearings aligned with his past. Estrada's sudden reemergence. LaGuerta's unexplained presence in places that should be random. He can feel the investigation bending toward him, not as a net closing in, but as bait being lowered. That's the razor's edge. LaGuerta's trap is dangerous, precisely because it's nearly airtight. Nearly, she underestimates one variable she can't model on a whiteboard. Dexter Morgan. Deb is the last piece of Dexter's collapsing world that he still believes he can control. The one ally who can rewrite any scene by choosing him over procedure. So when the Estrada ploy misfires and the shipping yard becomes the new stage, we're already primed for collision. LaGuerta's best plan, Dexter's last-ditch improvisation, and Deb's fractured loyalty are all heading toward the same patch of concrete. Along the way, every illusion of control they've clung to will get tested, and Deb will be forced into a choice that no code can justify. And right at that intersection, where plans collide on concrete, the story quietly shifts. The real fault line isn't just between Dexter and LaGuerta. It runs straight through Dexter Morgan. Let's kick things off with her psychology in this stretch of the season. Deb has already walked into a church and watched her brother drive a knife into Travis Marshall. She's watched him wrap that horror in Harry's code and call it necessary. By the time LaGuerta finds that stray blood slide at the Travis scene, Deb isn't just a witness, she's an accomplice in denial. Trying to retrofit her identity as a cop around a truth that makes no sense. To keep this clear, Deb is trapped between two loyalties that used to be the same thing. On one side, there's Dexter, the person she's built her whole emotional life around, the one constant in a childhood defined by violence and abandonment. On the other, there's the badge, the procedure, the belief that the investigation and the law will sort the world into victims and perpetrators. LaGuerta, refusing to let the Bay Harbor Butcher case rest on Dokes' corpse, suddenly embodies that second loyalty in a way Deb can't ignore. The focus is not just on what LaGuerta is doing, but on what Deb has to do to stop her. We watch Deb falsify gas receipts, massage timelines, and lean on her authority as lieutenant to redirect resources. She nudges Batista away from LaGuerta's theories. She loses files. She pressures Dexter to be more careful, even as she covers his tracks. But here's the failure built into her plan. She's operating as if LaGuerta is still guessing, while LaGuerta is already pulling marina records, tracking dump sites, and putting Dexter's name on warrants. There's a brutal, tragic symmetry in how this plays out. In any other season, Deb would admire LaGuerta's refusal to accept a convenient narrative, her insistence that Dokes was framed and that the evidence doesn't add up. That's what Deb believes good cops do. Yet now, that same integrity is the thing that will expose Dexter as the Bay Harbor Butcher and retroactively stain every case Deb has ever worked. How do you cheer for the truth when the consequences erase your entire life? For Dexter, this is a new kind of dependence. His survival has always been about his own control, his rituals, his code. Now it hinges on whether Deb is willing to keep crossing moral lines on his behalf. He needs her to lie, to obstruct, to choose him over the institution that gave her purpose. Each major section of their conflict becomes another test. Will she sign the form, fake the report, ignore the pattern? By the time the Estrada trap pushes everything back to the shipping yard. The central question isn't just whether LaGuerta can prove her case. It's whether Deb will stand with the law, LaGuerta, and the truth, or with Dexter, secrecy, and blood. She's walking toward a night where there is no good choice, only two different versions of ruin. And LaGuerta, armed with evidence but blind to Deb's breaking point, is stepping straight into the blast radius. We cut to the shipping yard at night, and everything about the space tells us what the characters refuse to admit. Rusted cranes frozen in silhouette, sodium lights buzzing over rows of steel containers stacked 3-4 high, narrow corridors of metal that turn the whole place into a maze where sound dies quickly and sightlines vanish. It's public infrastructure, technically, but out here, this late, it may as well be a private arena. To keep this clear, the physical layout is doing narrative work. Those container canyons create pockets of visibility and pockets of total blindness. A truck backfires in the distance, a ship horn bleeds through the fog. But between the stacks, it's just echoing footsteps and the click of a gun being drawn. If Dexter's entire life is about controlling the scene, this is his ideal environment on paper. Isolated, compartmentalized, easy to stage and clean. Yet, as we'll see, the very maze he relies on to manage the confrontation is what lets the investigation, the emotions, and the lies collide out of his line of sight. Dexter walks into this yard with a 3-part plan. Neutralize LaGuerta before she can expose him, tie off the Estrada loose end she's weaponized against him, and somehow keep Deb outside the blast radius, away from the part of him that the code never really restrained. He trusts his improvisation. He's survived Dokes, Trinity, and an entire season of Bay Harbor scrutiny in his psychology. That history translates into entitlement. The central question in his mind isn't whether he can control the night, it's how cleanly he can do it. LaGuerta arrives with a different sense of control. For her, this isn't just a risky meet, it's the culmination of a rebuilt case. She has the blood slide from Travis Marshall, the marina records, the shipping container patterns, and Hector Estrada as bait to test her theory that Dexter is the Bay Harbor Butcher. She believes this yard gives her a controlled environment, limited exits, known positions, backup on standby, or at least close enough to lock in the arrest once Dexter overplays his hand. In her head, the trajectory is simple. Catch him in motion, expose the pattern, end the debate that began with Dokes' death. And then there's Deb. She moves through this space without a clear objective, which is exactly why she's so dangerous to everyone's plan. She's chasing fragments, gas receipts, surveillance gaps, the sick feeling that Dexter is orchestrating something unforgivable. She tells herself she can still make a choice when it counts. Save LaGuerta and the truth. Save Dexter and the only family she has left. Maybe, somehow, both. That's her illusion of control. The focus is not just on 3 people in a dark yard. It's on 3 competing fantasies of agency. Dexter thinks his kill room logic still applies. LaGuerta thinks good police work guarantees a just outcome. Deb thinks there will be time to decide. All three are wrong. This shipping yard is where those illusions go to die. Because along the way, as we walk through the showdown beat by beat, we'll see how LaGuerta almost wins, how Dexter's plan finally collapses completely, and how Deb's last decision doesn't just end the investigation. It rewrites all of their fates in a single, irreversible shot. So while that shipping yard will be the visible collapse, the real story of how we get there starts somewhere much quieter. It starts with LaGuerta alone in her office, long after everyone else has gone home, drowning in cardboard boxes from a case the department has already buried. Old Bay Harbor Butcher files spread across her desk, crime scene photos taped to the walls. A map of Miami with pins marking dump sites and victim pickups. To keep this clear, she doesn't begin as a genius pattern analyst. She begins as a grieving colleague. She's defending Dokes in absentia, clinging to the belief that the investigation failed him. But as she traces the victim list, highlights disposal methods, and lines up the timing of each body that washed up from the ocean, something shifts. She stops asking, how did they frame Dokes? And starts asking, what kind of plan produces this pattern? Who has this level of control over victims, transport, and evidence? The pins on the map pull her toward one constant: proximity to Miami Metro investigations. Cases Dokes worked. Cases the department touched. Cases where forensics were unusually involved. The focus is not just on who died, but when they died relative to active investigations, and what that says about the butcher's psychology. He's not hunting at random. He's orbiting the station. And then the anomaly drops into her lap. The Travis Marshall blood slide, a tiny glass square at a crime scene that should have closed Dexter's trajectory forever. For LaGuerta, it's the crack in the tombstone of Bay Harbor. The butcher's signature didn't end with Dokes' death. It just went underground. If a slide appears at Travis's crime scene, and Travis is a case Miami Metro is neck deep in, what does that imply? The butcher didn't retire. He adapted. He's still here, still working their cases. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this move. LaGuerta treating what everyone else writes off as coincidence as dead. She quietly reopens Bay Harbor, but not with a press conference, with a board, with dates, with job assignments. One night, she writes Dexter Morgan forensics on a sticky note and, almost experimentally, starts overlaying his career timeline onto the Bay Harbor grid. When did he join? Which investigations did he process? How often do the killings spike when he's in the middle of an investigation versus when he's on vacation or sidelined? The lines start to converge. Bodies dumped from marinas Dexter uses, victims tied to cases he worked. The original Bay Harbor window sinking with the rise of his role in blood spatter. Each major section will show us Dexter's plans failing, but here we watch LaGuerta's case slowly succeed. No shouting, no accusations in the bullpen, just a woman everyone dismisses as too emotional about Dokes building a rational, methodical theory that happens to be true. That's the paradox. The one person who sees through Dexter's illusion of control is the one the show trains the other characters not to take seriously. But we see the board. We see the escalating focus. We know this isn't a hunch anymore. It's a case, hardening inch by inch. And then, late one night, after one more pass over the dates and dump sites, she circles a single name at the center of everything: Dexter Morgan. Not as someone she'll confront tomorrow, but as the quiet target of a long game she's now committed to playing, no matter what it costs. The moment LaGuerta circles Dexter's name, the investigation is still quiet. But Dexter feels it before he ever sees a file or a warrant. His survival has always depended on this internal radar, that hypersensitive read on tone, posture, and eye contact. People don't have to say, "I suspect you," for him to hear it. They just have to look at him a fraction of a second too long. Let's kick things off with those micro shifts. At the Travis Marshall scene, LaGuerta doesn't just process the rooftop and move on. She stays. She watches Dexter work. Her gaze doesn't track the blood pattern. It tracks him. When she finds that single blood slide, we can almost feel the temperature in the room change, even though no one says a word. A detail that should have died with the Bay Harbor Butcher suddenly lives again in her hand. From there, the tells accumulate. She lingers at his crime scenes. She asks oddly specific questions about procedure, why he chose one swab over another, how he knew where to look, whether certain dump sites could be connected. She starts revisiting old Bay Harbor evidence in her office, late, alone, in a way that doesn't match her usual political priorities. The focus is not just on closing cases anymore. It's on reopening one that should have stayed buried. Dexter notices. Of course he does. But his first response is overconfidence. In his psychology, LaGuerta is still the ambitious bureaucrat, the ladder climber who protected Doka's reputation for optics, not truth. How dangerous can that be? He assumes that as long as he controls the narrative, her curiosity will burn out. That misread becomes the seed of his later failure. So he tries to normalize everything. Casual hallway conversations, light jokes about paperwork, subtle probing about what she's working on, framed as friendly interest. He even offers help on active cases, keeping her close enough that he can monitor her, but not close enough, he thinks, to see him. To keep this clear, he believes proximity equals control. But we hear the tonal shift in his inner monologue. Early seasons, LaGuerta is an annoyance, a political obstacle to navigate around. Now there's a low, constant hum of concern. Why is she pulling marina records? Why is she talking to Batista about Bay Harbor again? Why is she visiting Estrada in prison? The central question stops being, how do I keep my job smooth? And becomes, how much does she actually know? And here's the paradox. The more Dexter tries to act natural, the more he has to consciously perform normalcy. He rehearses smiles. He calibrates eye contact. He over-explains simple findings. Those tiny behavioral glitches, those half-second delays, are exactly the kind of tells a seasoned cop can register. Along the way, every adjustment he makes to protect his plan adds one more crack to the mask she's studying. It culminates in a small, chilling beat, a quiet moment in the bullpen, or at a crime scene when Dexter looks up and catches LaGuerta watching him. Not as a colleague, not as Dokes' grieving friend. As a puzzle she is dangerously close to solving. In that stare, he finally admits to himself what we've already seen building. LaGuerta isn't a nuisance anymore. She's a problem, moving steadily toward collapse. LaGuerta's stare is the moment the official story starts to wobble, because for years the narrative around Dokes was airtight, volatile cop, explosive temper, went rogue as the Bay Harbor Butcher, and died in a cabin surrounded by trophies. Case closed. Neat, tragic, and incredibly convenient for everyone who needed the horror to have a face they already feared. Let's kick things off with that convenience. Miami Metro gets to keep its clearance rate and avoid the shame of a serial killer inside the building. The FBI can file Bay Harbor undersolved and move on. The public gets a simple psychology. The scary, angry, black cop snapped. Even LaGuerta, in those first aftermath days, signs off on that plan, because the alternative is institutional collapse. If Dokes wasn't the butcher, then the real monster is still walking the halls. But time passes. Grief cools. And LaGuerta does something Dexter never anticipates. She goes back to the paperwork. She pulls Dokes' personnel file, IA reports, field evaluations, page after page of excessive force, unprofessional conduct, anger management. Yet when she reads closely, she doesn't see a secret predator hiding in plain sight. She sees a man whose rage was always visible, always documented, and still tethered to procedure. Dokes didn't stalk in shadows. He confronted suspects in broad daylight. To keep this clear, LaGuerta isn't romanticizing him. She's rerunning the investigation. She re-examines the cabin explosion, the timing of the body discovery, the sudden appearance of every piece of incriminating evidence in one perfect cinematic fireball. Does that match the Bay Harbor Butcher we were told about? A meticulous killer who dismembered, bagged, and ocean-dumped bodies with surgical control suddenly leaves a cache of corpses and tools in a single location. Right after being tailed by Dokes, the central question for her becomes simple. Who is this sloppiness really protecting? So she goes off the record. She talks to people who actually knew Dokes, former partners who hated riding with him but trusted his instincts, colleagues who remember him calling out corruption, not hiding in it, family who describe a rigid, damaged man, yes, but one whose violence moved outward in bursts, not inward in ritual. The portrait that emerges is flawed, consistent, and crucially, not compatible with the psychological profile of the butcher. If anything, Dokes looks like the kind of cop who would hunt that killer, not become him. By even saying this out loud, LaGuerta is detonating her own past choices. She's not just defending a dead man, she's accusing the entire system, including herself, of accepting a too neat resolution. What does it mean when the investigation that made your career now looks like a failure of courage? And once she mentally clears Dokes, the frame shifts. The question isn't, was the Bay Harbor Butcher caught? It's who benefited from Dokes being blamed? Who was close to the case, close to the dump sites, close to the evidence? Dexter's proximity stops being background noise and starts reading like design. We feel that shift land in one image. LaGuerta standing at Dokes' memorial plaque, not in tears, but in calculation. Her hand on his name isn't about closure, it's leverage. His ghost becomes the crowbar she's going to use to pry open the truth, even if it means tearing apart the life of the quiet blood spatter analyst who's been standing beside her the whole time. In this video, we're going to watch what happens when that quiet rebellion turns into a full-scale hunt. So let's kick things off with something deceptively boring. A computer terminal, a stack of old Port Authority logins, and Mara LaGuerta alone in a dim records room. No gun drawn, no shouting, just the soft clatter of keys as she pulls 10-year-old container manifests and GPS pings tied to the Bay Harbor Butcher victims everyone else has filed away as solved. On paper, this is grunt work. In practice, it's the first quiet breach in Dexter's illusion of control. To keep this clear, we need to track her psychology, not just her procedure. LaGuerta's core question isn't who killed these people. That's already been answered with Dokes' memorial plaque. The central question for her is, could one man, working solo, really have orchestrated this entire maritime operation? If the butcher used the ocean as a dumping ground, there had to be a logistical trail. Boats, docks, rental slips, container access logs. That's not rage. That's a plan. And Dokes? He doesn't fit that plan. He didn't have a boat. He didn't have the free nights. He didn't have the clean, methodical logistics. So LaGuerta starts cross-referencing. Disappearance windows against marina gate swipes, container IDs against GPS, coordinates where bodies surfaced. Coast Guard reports against Miami Metro's own case files. Stalk the pattern. Confirm the anomalies. Prepare to break the story. Leave no assumption untouched. Then, the patterns start to repeat. The same set of docks shows up around multiple victims, a particular shipping lane, a handful of containers checked out or accessed at odd hours, always hugging the edges of key nights when people vanished. And when she overlays those coordinates with Miami Metro's footprint, the overlap is unnerving. Some of those nights, Dexter was supposedly working late. Some of those scenes, he was the one processing the blood. This is where the data turns from mundane to malignant. We're looking at numbers, dates, container IDs, gate timestamps, no dramatic reveal, just rows in a spreadsheet. But when LaGuerta prints a map of Miami's waterfront and starts drawing thin red lines between docks, container yards, and dump sites, the web tightens around a single gravitational center, the life of a blood spatter analyst whose schedule always seems to flex around the ocean. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this gap between surface normalcy and hidden infrastructure. The focus is not just on Dexter's kills, but on the support system his code secretly requires: rental slips, bleach purchases, marina fees, and now container yards that have seen more than freight. So LaGuerta drives to one of those yards in broad daylight. Sun-bleached metal walls, rusted locks hanging from doors that haven't been opened in years, seagulls screaming overhead while forklifts beep lazily in the distance. To anyone else, it's industrial noise. To her, something feels off. The air is too still. The geometry of stacked containers feels staged. She doesn't know she's standing inside Dexter's old kill zone ecosystem, but her instincts register the psychic residue of his perfect system. Along the way, her investigation stays quiet, almost invisible. No task force, no press conference, just one more cross-reference, shipping records against internal Miami Metro access logs. She filters by date, by time, by badge ID. A familiar name appears attached to a restricted marina access point at an hour that makes no sense. Dexter Morgan. The screen freezes her for a beat. The net doesn't close yet, but one more knot just cinched tight. LaGuerta has Dexter's name on a screen. Dexter's response is to put her under a microscope. This is the moment the investigation quietly becomes an arms race. Let's kick things off with what Dexter does best: surveillance. He watches which old Bay Harbor files she pulls from evidence, which marina logs she reprints, which crime scene photos suddenly reappear on her desk. At night, he ghosts through Miami Metro, tracking her digital footprints, checking access histories, seeing her badge ID pop up on shipping records and dump site maps. The hunter is now building a case file on the cop who is building a case file on him. Then, he crosses a line he's always assumed he would never have to cross. He breaks into her office, he bypasses her password, he opens her private case notes, and there, in LaGuerta's handwriting, he sees his life as a pattern instead of a story. Blood slides at Travis Marshall's scene link back to Bay Harbor. Marina access synced to missing offenders. Slice-of-life movements plotted against tides and currents. The cold shock here is psychological. Dexter is reading the code of his own ritual translated into evidence. To keep this clear, the central question for Dexter becomes strategic. What is the plan? Discredit LaGuerta as a grieving captain who cannot let Dokes go? Manipulate her? Feed her a new suspect? Let the institution swallow her doubts? Or eliminate her entirely, applying the kill room solution to someone inside the very system that has always shielded him? Each option carries consequences that don't exist with his usual targets, because for the first time the threat and the protection share the same badge. He chooses soft interference first. In this video, we're going to see this as a familiar pattern: Dexter trusting misdirection over confrontation. He plants alternative leads, nudging her toward Estrada, toward phantom accomplices, toward the comforting idea that the real butcher is still out there. He subtly reframes her investigation in the bullpen, dropping comments that make her look obsessed, emotional, compromised by history with Dokes. On paper, it's a solid control strategy. If the narrative collapses around her, the case collapses with it. But LaGuerta does not take the bait. The more dead ends Dexter manufactures, the more she reads the interference as confirmation. Why are records missing only after she touches them? Why does Dexter keep appearing at the periphery of her off-book moves? Every time he thinks he's redirected the trajectory, she circles back sharper, more certain, less willing to let institutional pressure shut her down. The focus is not just on a cop closing in, it's on Dexter's psychology, under a new kind of pressure. He's no longer cleaning up a mess after a kill on his own timetable. He's in an active chess match with someone who can subpoena his GPS data, pull his security footage, and haul him into an interrogation room with a warrant instead of a hunch. He's reacting, not orchestrating. That loss of initiative is its own kind of exposure. By the time he realizes passive defense will never be enough, the clock is already ticking. If LaGuerta keeps building this file, she won't just suspect him, she'll be able to prove it. And that dawning realization pushes Dexter toward a lethal solution he's never fully allowed himself to imagine before, putting a cop on his table. The next move will not be a nudge. It will be an attempt to erase the investigation at its source. And right as Dexter decides the only way out is to erase LaGuerta, the series drops the cruelest complication it can: Debra. She isn't just collateral in this investigation anymore. She's the hinge, the one person standing between LaGuerta's slow, methodical truth and Dexter's increasingly desperate plan to keep control. Let's kick things off with Deb's new reality. She has seen Dexter on the kill table. She's helped burn a body. She's been walked through Harry's code as if it were a twisted training manual. And then she has to walk into Miami Metro, sit across from LaGuerta, and pretend she's still the same by the book lieutenant in waiting she was a season earlier. That's not just pressure. That's an ongoing psychological freefall. LaGuerta, meanwhile, does something Dexter never anticipated. She starts using Deb as a confidant. Over takeout and late-night file dives, she floats the idea that the Bay Harbor Butcher case might be a failure, that Dokes was framed, that the real killer is still out there. She brings up the blood slide from the Travis Marshall scene. She mentions shipping records, the slice of life, the trajectory of the original investigation. And every time, she watches Deb. How does a neutral cop react to the possibility that a dead colleague was wrongly condemned? To keep this clear, Deb's conflict splits along two lines. As a cop, she should be thrilled someone is willing to reopen a potentially wrongful conviction, to correct the collapse of justice that turned Dokes into a monster. As a sister, she knows that any door LaGuerta opens into Bay Harbor leads straight through Dexter's patterns, his victims, his mistakes. Which loyalty wins when every honest step forward is another step toward her brother's execution? We see her start to manage LaGuerta the way she's trying to manage Dexter. She nudges conversations away from Dexter's role in old cases, insists he's just a blood guy who got pulled into things, leans on emotional appeals about letting Dokes rest and not ripping open old wounds at the department. When LaGuerta brings up gas receipts, surveillance footage, and marina records, Deb doesn't lean in like a hunter chasing truth. She flinches, stalls, pivots, and that protective reflex backfires. Because LaGuerta might not know the secret, but she knows the psychology of an honest cop. Deb's evasions, her sudden volatility, the way she shuts down any theory that even brushes Dexter, it all reads as compromised. Not corrupt for money or promotion, but compromised by something deeper she refuses to name. Along the way, the emotional cost spikes. Deb's anxiety goes through the roof. She's popping pills, losing sleep, blowing up at colleagues. The more she lies to LaGuerta, the more she starts to resemble the very rot she's always raged against in the department. Backroom deals, buried evidence. Outcomes chosen first, and investigations bent to fit. By the time LaGuerta looks across her desk and really studies Deb, there's a new calculation in her eyes. Concern, yes, but also strategy. If Dexter Morgan is the missing piece in this collapsing puzzle, the central question becomes chillingly simple. What is Deborah Morgan hiding? And will breaking her be the only way to finally expose him? So when LaGuerta leans back from that study of Deb and reaches for the old Bay Harbor files, she isn't just revisiting a closed case. She's rebuilding a collapsed narrative. The investigation that once wrapped everything around Dokes now becomes raw material, a failed theory she can strip for parts and reassemble around a new center of gravity. Let's kick things off with that process. She pulls FBI profiles, forensic reports, behavioral analyses from the original task force, then overlays them with a new anomaly. A single blood slide at the Travis Marshall scene, a ritual detail that should not exist anymore. Dokes is dead. The butcher is dead. Yet the signature returns. That one fragment detonates the illusion of control the old case pretended to have. To keep this clear, LaGuerta doesn't chase the myth of a monster. She isolates traits. Meticulous planning. Forensic awareness that borders on professional expertise. Emotional detachment at scenes that should shatter any normal psyche. And beneath all of that, a moral code. A pattern of victims who are not random citizens, but criminals who slipped through the system. The Bay Harbor Butcher is not just killing. He is editing the city's failures. That's where she rejects the easy story of a chaotic sadist. The Butcher is organized, ritualistic, oddly principled. He stalks, he confirms, he prepares, he cleans, he leaves almost nothing behind. This is not someone acting out impulsive rage. It's someone who believes he's correcting the record, rewriting justice in his own hand. The psychology is not of a thrill killer, but of a self-appointed auditor of human life. And as she refines that profile, it starts to look disturbingly familiar. Who do we know who is calm under pressure, almost eerily so? Who moves through the worst crime scenes in Miami with hyper-competent ease, cataloging blood, trajectories, consequences, while everyone else is still catching their breath? Who is always there when the biggest cases break, yet somehow remains emotionally distant from the horror right in front of him? The investigation turns inward. The focus is not just on the city anymore, it's on the building she works in. There's a chilling moment where LaGuerta realizes the Butcher would almost have to be inside law enforcement to maintain this level of access, to stay ahead of every plan to catch him for so many years. Who else would know dump sites, search protocols, the blind spots in the code and the system? With that single insight, her suspect pool collapses. She is no longer scanning millions of strangers. She is looking at a handful of people with badges, lab coats, and key cards. Dexter sits dead center in that Venn diagram. Blood expert, emotionally muted, always present, and now directly connected to a resurrected bloodslide. Along the way, LaGuerta's profile stops being abstract and becomes a mirror. On the bottom of the page, she writes one line: he thinks he's the hero, and as she underlines it, her own plan crystallizes. If his entire psychology is built on that heroic fantasy, then exposing him as the opposite isn't just about evidence, it's about detonating the story he's been hiding inside since Bay Harbor. And that line on LaGuerta's notepad, he thinks he's the hero, doesn't stay theoretical for long, because almost immediately her investigation collides with the name that made Dexter a killer in the first place, Hector Estrada. Let's kick things off by grounding who Estrada actually is in Dexter's mythology. Before the blood slides, before the code, before Miami Metro, there was a young boy in a shipping container sitting in his mother's blood. Hector Estrada is one of the men responsible for that massacre. He's not just another name on a list. He's the origin point of Dexter's trauma, the raw material Harry weaponized into a system of control. To keep this clear, LaGuerta doesn't start with that history. She starts with paperwork. Old Bay Harbor files, messy case summaries, victim lists cross-referenced with missing criminals. As she reconstructs the butcher's trajectory, a pattern emerges. Cartel enforcers, gang hitters, men who disappeared right after major busts. And then she sees it, the Estrada case. Shipping container. Dismembered woman. Surviving child. Known conspirators. One of them, Hector, slipped through the cracks. On paper, Estrada should have been a prime target for the Bay Harbor Butcher. He fits the profile so perfectly, it's almost academic, violent offender, tied to Dexter's mother, still breathing when half his crew ends up dead. Yet when LaGuerta Cross checks him against the confirmed body count, he's conspicuously absent. No remains. No dump site match. Nothing. How does a man like that avoid a killer like this? That absence becomes a question mark she can't ignore. If the butcher is really a vigilante with a code, skipping Estrada isn't just a gap, it's a contradiction. So she starts digging. Current incarceration status. Transfer orders. Parole hearings that never made the evening news. Sealed documents that require favors and quiet access. Along the way, she realizes there's a window coming, an early release, a supervised outing, something that puts Estrada back into circulation. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern, the moment when Dexter thinks he's closing a circle, and someone else is quietly turning that circle into a trap. While LaGuerta is framing Estrada as bait to test whether the butcher is still active, Dexter is independently tracking him for something much more personal. For Dexter, Estrada isn't evidence. He's destiny. We watch Dexter stalk Estrada's file with the same intensity he once reserved for Trinity. Prison records, visitor logs, the logistics of how to move a high-risk inmate into a kill room without leaving a trace. His plan feels like the ultimate expression of the code: return to the container, erase the last living link to that night, finally take control of the story that made him. But that's the structural irony. The focus is not just on Estrada as a target, but on how two different investigations, LaGuerta's official case and Dexter's private vendetta, converge on the same man for opposite reasons. For her, Estrada is a live experiment. If she dangles him, will the butcher bite? For Dexter, he's the one kill he cannot walk away from. Those trajectories guarantee collision. So we end with a quiet image. Estrada, older, meaner, sitting in a grimy prison visiting room. A guard calls his name. Two different people from two different worlds are saying Hector Estrada into systems he doesn't understand. He looks up, hearing his name from mouths he doesn't recognize, unaware he's about to become the fulcrum of a war between a cop and a killer, and that whichever side wins, his survival is already off the table. We cut from Estrada, hearing his name in that dingy visiting room, to a different kind of chamber entirely, the sterile, fluorescent calm of a parole hearing. LaGuerta sits at the end of the table, posture perfect, expression neutral. On paper, she's just another voice in the process. In reality, she's steering the entire room. She doesn't claim Hector Estrada is rehabilitated. She doesn't pretend his file isn't radioactive. Instead, she talks about overcrowding, about procedural timelines, about how long he's already served relative to similar offenders. It's all technical language, all policy and precedent. The central question she's answering is not, is he safe? But can we justify keeping him? And because this is a system she's helped build, she knows exactly which levers to pull. To keep this clear, LaGuerta's plan here isn't sentimental, and it isn't impulsive. She's leveraging rank, reputation, and years of institutional memory. She calls in favors with board members she once promoted. She nudges paperwork to the top of stacks. She makes sure no single colleague ever hears her say Estrada's name twice in the same context. From the outside, it looks like routine bureaucracy grinding forward. Inside her head, it's a controlled experiment aimed straight at the Bay Harbor Butcher. And because she understands how visible a misstep would be, she builds safeguards that look nothing like what they actually are. She arranges for a high-risk parolee monitoring initiative, sells it as data collection, then quietly assigns a couple of trusted officers to track Estrada's movements. She requests extra patrols near certain marinas under vague pretenses. She lines up unmarked cars, burner phones, and loose surveillance protocols so that no one officer, no one report reveals the pattern of what she's really doing. Is she using a dangerous criminal as bait? Absolutely. But in her psychology, this isn't recklessness, it's triage. If the Bay Harbor Butcher is still active, if he's embedded inside law enforcement, the way her reopened investigation suggests, then releasing Estrada is the cleanest way to force that predator into the open. One controlled risk to expose a systemic threat. That's the math she's doing. Notice the contrast in control. While she's thinking in terms of patterns, timelines, and proof, Dexter is thinking in terms of childhood trauma, chainsaws, and revenge. For LaGuerta, Estrada is a variable in a larger investigation. For Dexter, he's the last living link to his mother's murder. We watch two plans forming in parallel. One cold and procedural, one hot and personal. Which one is more dangerous? This is where the ethical tension sharpens. LaGuerta is bending rules, maybe breaking them, and yes, she's endangering the public. But from her perspective, the consequences of inaction are worse, if she's right about Dexter. Then, every day he walks free is another silent failure of the system she's sworn to defend. In this video, we're going to keep asking whether that ends justify the means. Logic actually makes her more like Dexter than she realizes. Estrada steps through the prison gates into blinding daylight, shielding his eyes, breathing free air for the first time in years. He thinks he's walking away from danger. He doesn't see the unmarked car down the road. He doesn't see Dexter's shadow already moving to intercept. Two predators, one piece of bait, and a trajectory that can only end in exposure or collapse. Estrada walks toward the parking lot, and Dexter is already 10 steps ahead in his mind. Before Estrada even breathes that free air, Dexter has done what he always does when he wants total control. He builds a box. Not a literal one at first. A conceptual one. A plan. Let's kick things off inside that box. Plastic sheeting stretched tight over concrete, seams double-taped, drains covered, the table is wiped down, tools laid out with surgical symmetry, knives, saw, duct tape, the familiar roll of clear wrap. On the walls, not just Estrada's mugshot, but grainy photos of the shipping container massacre, rusted metal, blood-stained saws, Harry's crime scene shots of Laura Moser's body. This isn't just a kill room, it's a ritualized reenactment. Dexter trying to close the loop on his origin trauma by physically surrounding himself with it. To keep this clear, Dexter doesn't improvise Estrada. He engineers him. We watch him surveil Estrada after the release, tracking his cheap motels, the bars he favors, the alleys where he slips away to make calls. He clocks Estrada's limp, his tendency to drink too much, the way he keeps one hand near his waistband like he's always expecting a shiv. From that data, Dexter selects a location that is both symbolically perfect and logistically safe, near the docks, within sightline of the shipping containers where his life was shattered, but in a disused corner, with minimal foot traffic and easy access to water for disposal. Stalk the target, confirm the pattern, prepare the room. Each major section will sound familiar by now, but here the redundancies multiply. Dexter has backup locations mapped in case Estrada changes routines, alternate disposal methods if the ocean is compromised. Alibis anchored to his work schedule at Miami Metro with time-stamped calls and case files ready to explain every absence. This is not a crime of passion. It's a scheduled operation. And yet, the psychology is different. The focus is not just on staying unseen. It's on being healed. Unlike Trinity or Travis Marshall, Estrada is personal. Dexter frames this kill as therapy, a way to silence the echoes of his childhood screams that have haunted every season of his trajectory. He imagines Harry's approval. He imagines the nightmares easing once this man is wrapped in plastic. That's the blind spot. Because he's so invested in his own narrative of closure, he underestimates the external variables. He assumes the investigation around Estrada begins and ends with him. The central question, could someone else be watching this same piece of bait just as closely, barely crosses his mind. We still see the motions of paranoia. Dexter circles blocks to check for tails. He scans mirrors for unmarked cars, sweeps the kill room entrance for hidden cameras, runs through worst-case scenarios. But each negative result doesn't sharpen his caution, it soothes him. He takes the absence of cops as proof of control, not as a potential setup. That's the quiet failure baked into the plan. So we end on him alone in the prepared room, knife in hand. Photos of the shipping container massacre staring back at him. He rehearses the confrontation, the lines about justice, the final cut that will fix everything. Along the way, LaGuerta has already threaded herself into the same equation from another angle. Dexter just can't see that his perfect box has another hunter closing in from the dark. He's in the kill room, knife ready, the past literally taped to plastic all around him. But while Dexter rehearses control, the city is already moving against him. Out on the street, the Estrada operation is unfolding as a split screen we never see directly, but we can feel. 2 hunters, 1 target, 1 collapsing plan. On one side, LaGuerta sits behind the investigation, tracking Hector Estrada through her team's updates, GPS pings, and quiet orders. She's not chasing a random fugitive, she's testing a theory. If Dexter is the Bay Harbor Butcher, Estrada is the perfect pressure point. On the other side, Dexter shadows Estrada independently, using his own surveillance, his own timetable. Convinced he's the only one truly in control of this night, they converge on the same coordinates without realizing it. Patrol cars float at the edges. An unmarked unit idles. LaGuerta isn't riding along as an afterthought. She's there because she expects the butcher to make a move on this man who helped butcher Dexter's mother. The psychology is clean in her mind. If the code is real, Estrada is irresistible bait. Dexter lures Estrada toward his chosen site, that familiar choreography of threat and leverage. Stalk the target. Funnel him to the room. Close the door. Then, something fractures. A distant radio crackle cuts through the dark. Headlights sweep where no headlights should be. A shadow of blue and red where there should only be black. In a life built on reading scenes, Dexter suddenly realizes this scene has extra players. LaGuerta steps into the area not as a frightened supervisor, but as a hunter walking into her own snare. She's not surprised there's danger here. She's counting on it. The central question for her is simple. Will the ghost of Bay Harbor show up when Estrada is exposed? When she sees strange movement, hears the same radio Dexter hears. Her sting stops being theoretical. It becomes live fire. Estrada senses it first. The air is wrong. He panics, bolts, crashes through the fragile geometry Dexter spent days assembling. Now, everything that was supposed to be under plastic is suddenly out in the open. Dexter has to abort the kill on the fly. No ritual, no speech, no controlled cut, just chaos. To keep this clear, this is the moment Dexter's role flips. Predator to cornered animal in a single beat. His code is built for careful selection, prepared rooms, and clean exits. It is not designed for improvising around active police units, a fleeing target, and a captain who already suspects his entire second life. He scrambles, hides, redirects, but every reactive move leaves more noise, more evidence, more questions. And that's the key failure. In trying to both eliminate Estrada and remain invisible, he manages neither. Estrada disappears into the night. LaGuerta walks away without a body, without a confession, but with something much more dangerous: confirmation that the butcher is real, present, and watching the same man she is. We end on her in the aftermath, scanning tire tracks, half-formed footprints. The ghost of a near ambush that doesn't match any standard criminal trajectory. Along the way, she silently upgrades her suspicion to conviction. In this video, we're going to follow that thread with her as she pulls it tighter and tighter, even as it starts to circle back toward Dexter Morgan himself. She goes home, but her mind stays in that shipping yard. The Estrada night replays on a loop. The timing, the positions, the radio calls that almost formed an ambush, and then didn't. LaGuerta walks it through frame by frame. Estrada's sudden disappearance, Dexter's proximity, Deb's miraculous arrival. From a tactical standpoint, the whole operation looks like a plan that tried to happen and then got quietly strangled in the dark. To keep this clear, she does what good cops do, she writes. She sketches the yard, marks where every cruiser should have been, where every officer actually was, and where Dexter keeps slipping into the margins. Why was he close to the scene before the call went out? Why did the one night she used Estrada as bait, the bait almost vanished without a trace? The central question stops being whether something went wrong. It becomes who intervened. So she goes back to the beginning of this investigation and cross-checks the pipeline of information. Who knew about Estrada's transfer? Who had access to the sting details, the transport schedule, the contingency routes? The list is short, and Dexter's name sits on it like a stain. 1 coincidence is survivable. 2 is annoying. 3, wrapped around the same forensic analyst who dropped a Bay Harbor-style bloodslide at the Travis Marshall scene, starts to look like pattern. From there, her scope widens. She pulls the old files on the original shipping container massacre, the night that created both Dexter Morgan and the Bay Harbor Butcher's mythology. Estrada is in those files. Dexter's mother is in those files. Harry is in those files. The shared origin point feels too narratively perfect to ignore, especially when the adult Dexter keeps orbiting the same docks, the same marinas, the same ocean that once swallowed dozens of dismembered bodies. And we watch her language change. Early notes say, something's off about Dexter. After Estrada, the phrasing hardens. Dexter Morgan may be the Bay Harbor Butcher. That's not a vibe. That's a working hypothesis. In this video, we're going to track how that single sentence quietly detonates every assumption she's held about her department, her dead partner, and the case she thought she'd already closed. Once that line is on paper, her behavior shifts. She starts compartmentalizing, deliberately keeping Dexter out of certain loops on Estrada and the reopened Bay Harbor investigation. She changes briefing levels, withholds small updates, and then watches. Does he ask the right follow-up questions? Does he press for details he shouldn't know? Each major section will show us another little test, another moment where LaGuerta uses absence of information as a probe into Dexter's psychology and need for control. But narrowing in on Dexter also narrows her margin for error. If she's wrong, she's targeting an innocent colleague and tearing open the old wound of Dokes' death for nothing. If she's right, she is effectively standing alone against a prolific killer embedded inside her own command structure. How do you arrest the person who processes your evidence, knows your procedures, and has already survived one full-scale task force? Along the way, she makes a quiet, irreversible move. She opens a fresh case file, writes Dexter Morgan on the tab, and places it beside the Bay Harbor Butcher folder on her desk. Two spines touching, two stories merging. In her mind, and now in her investigation, they are no longer separate cases. They are the same trajectory, and the next step is to prove it. Two folders touching on LaGuerta's desk. In one, the official story, Dokes the monster. In the other, the quiet heresy, Dexter Morgan as the real Bay Harbor Butcher. From that moment on, every move Dexter makes is no longer happening in a vacuum. It's happening under an investigation he can't see, and under a pressure he's never really faced, a cop who is actually right about him. When the Estrada plan implodes, we watch that pressure finally crack his illusion of control. He doesn't kill Estrada. He doesn't stay invisible. And he walks away knowing LaGuerta is not only alive, she's more certain than ever. For a man whose entire psychology is built on the fantasy that he can manage every variable, that night is a triple failure. Operationally, the kill collapses. Strategically, his cover frays. Existentially, the idea that he's careful dies on the floor of that shipping yard. So what does Dexter do? He doubles down. He tells himself this is just another problem to solve if he plans better, works harder, thinks faster than everyone else. We see him reassert order in the only ways he knows how, revising stalking routines, scrubbing his digital footprint, rehearsing alibis for LaGuerta's next move. To keep this clear, he's not questioning the code, he's trying to optimize it. In his mind, the system hasn't failed. He has, and that means he can still fix it. But the cracks are obvious. He starts cutting corners on surveillance, rushing setups, improvising in real time. He uses Estrada as bait, plants evidence, and tries to redirect suspicion in a single, overstuffed plan that Harry's code would have flagged as pure exposure. No cooling off period, no clean separation between hunter and hunted. Just Dexter, improvising around LaGuerta's every counter, as if speed alone could outpace consequences. Along the way, LaGuerta stops being a colleague and becomes a problem to be solved. The focus is not just on what she knows, but on how to neutralize her. We see him watching her from behind glass at the precinct, tracking her questions, mapping her trajectory through the case file in his head. The central question shifts, not how do I stay hidden, but how do I remove her from the equation? Has any other cop ever been allowed into that category? To get there, he has to rewrite his own moral logic. Harry's code defines cops as off-limits, the closest thing Dexter has to innocent. Now, to contemplate killing LaGuerta, he has to reclassify her as a threat, an active danger to his mission. The paradox is brutal. The more he tries to protect the code and his secret, the more he has to violate the principles that once gave that code meaning. Deborah is pulling in the opposite direction. She's begging him to stop, to step back from the edge, to let the investigation play out without more bodies. But every new piece of evidence LaGuerta uncovers convinces Dexter that the only way out is forward, through more manipulation, more violence, more risk. By the time we land back in the precinct, Dexter's staring at LaGuerta across the bullpen. We feel the line he's about to cross. For the first time in his life, the only way he sees to survive is to break the one rule that defined him. Kill a cop who is simply doing her job, and hope that doesn't pull his whole world down with her. So when we follow LaGuerta back to the waterfront, we're not just revisiting a location. We're watching the investigation physically close in on Dexter's former kingdom. The docks used to be his domain of control. Now they're her crime scene. This time, she isn't vaguely scanning container IDs. She's walking deliberate routes, tracing paths tied to victim timelines, security reports, and those nothing to see here after hours activity logs. Let's kick things off with the way she starts seeing the landscape differently. We watch her pause under a security camera, look up, and realize there's a blind spot that just happens to cover an isolated row of containers. One blind spot could be chance. 3 in a line, all facing the water? That's design. She checks maintenance records that say cameras were serviced last month. Then runs her hand over rusted brackets that haven't been touched in years. The paperwork and the metal tell 2 different stories, and LaGuerta believes the metal. From there, the anomalies stack. Access logs show Dexter's keycard pinging gates and doors long after his shift was over. Not once. Repeatedly, different nights, different sections of the yard. Always orbiting the same lonely corners of the docks. To keep this clear, she's not just thinking Dexter works near boats. She's mapping a trajectory, crime scenes, dump sites, and one particular blood analyst who always seems to be in the right place at exactly the wrong time. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern, the spaces Dexter thought were invisible becoming readable. LaGuerta steps into an empty container, the echo swallowing her footsteps, sunlight leaking through pinprick gaps in the metal. Dust floats in the beams like suspended ash. She stands in the center and quietly imagines plastic sheeting stapled to every surface. A metal table under a harsh worklight, drains hosed clean before dawn. She's never seen Dexter's ritual, but she's intuitively rebuilding the plan. Isolated container. Sound dampening steel. Easy access to the water. Everything a methodical killer would need. The central question for her shifts from who was Bay Harbor to who could have orchestrated this with precision. If the butcher used these docks, someone had to understand forensics, ocean currents, security systems, and police response times. Someone who knew when patrols were light. Someone who could pull case files, cross-check missing persons, and cherry-pick victims that wouldn't spike the stats. That's the investigative leap. The focus is not just on the bodies, it's on the infrastructure of the killings. When she lines up the data, Dexter's name appears again and again. His reports on key victims, his involvement in the original Bay Harbor investigation, his convenient proximity to multiple dump sites, and now, provably, to these quiet corners of the yard after hours. What are the odds this is coincidence? What are the odds this is control finally slipping? By dusk, LaGuerta stands at the edge of the dock, the water dark and flat, swallowing the last light. This is the ocean Dexter turned into a graveyard. She doesn't say his name out loud, but we feel the vow forming. Whoever did this, whoever built a code on top of all these vanished bodies, is going to be dragged into the light. Even if the next step means confronting Miami Metro itself. By the time LaGuerta is standing on that dock, Deborah is already living in 2 realities that are crashing toward each other. On one side, the captain's investigation is starting to feel less like a vendetta and more like a pattern. On the other, Dexter's plan to stay invisible is fraying so badly that Deb can feel the collapse coming before anyone else does. Let's kick things off with those quiet, procedural moments that hit Deb the hardest. LaGuerta doesn't storm in with accusations. She comes with questions. A marina log here. A gas receipt there. Photos of Dexter's car near the docks on nights that match Bay Harbor dump dates. To keep this clear, she's not asking Deb as a suspect. She's asking her as a colleague. Doesn't this look wrong? Deborah's answer is always no. Out loud, it's no. Inside, it's panic. When LaGuerta shows her the blood slide from the Travis Marshall scene and connects it back to the original Butcher investigation, Deb has to actively lie to insist the slide is a fluke, that Dokes was still the right man. Every deflection is a tiny betrayal of the straight arrow cop she's built herself into across season after season. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that split, what Deborah says versus what she believes. Because in her own psychology, she's not covering for a killer, she's buying time. Time to get Dexter to stop. Time to steer him back under some version of Harry's code that feels less catastrophic. She tells herself that if she can just manage him a little longer, the investigation will stall, and no one else has to die. But the focus is not just on LaGuerta pressing in. It's on Dexter refusing to pull back. Deb begs him to change course. Run, leave Miami. Take Harrison and disappear before the investigation tightens. Instead, he escalates. He uses Estrada as bait. He tries to flip LaGuerta into a target. Each new plan he describes sounds, to him, like control. To Deb, it sounds like a death spiral, where she's the only one paying the moral cost. What does the future look like from that vantage point? Deb starts to see only two branches. In one, LaGuerta succeeds, exposes Dexter as the Bay Harbor Butcher, and everything Deb believes about justice survives, while her brother is destroyed. In the other, Dexter neutralizes LaGuerta, and Deb becomes the last line of conscience between him and total monstrosity. The only person left who remembers that this was never supposed to be open season. Along the way, every conversation turns into a test. She feels she's failing. With LaGuerta, her voice shakes as she denies what she knows is true. With Dexter, her voice breaks as she pleads with someone who keeps choosing the knife over any exit. The walls close in from both sides until there's barely room for her to breathe. We end with Deb alone in her car at night, dashboard lights reflecting off her face, hands locked on the steering wheel. She understands, finally, that she will not be able to protect both the law and her brother. The central question becomes brutally simple. When the moment comes, who does she let die? And as we move toward that shipping yard showdown, we know there is no version of this trajectory where she walks away with everyone she loves still alive. And that's the pressure cooker Deb walks into. At the shipping yard, a brother who thinks he's writing the final chapter of his trauma, and a lieutenant who thinks she's about to crack the biggest investigation of her career. To keep this clear, we have to start with why Hector Estrada is not just another name on Dexter's table. Estrada is the original wound, one of the men who chainsawed Dexter's mother in front of him. The reason there even is a dark passenger, a code, a lifelong compulsion dressed up as justice. So when Dexter tracks Estrada down in Season 7, this isn't routine maintenance. This is origin story revenge, closing the loop. In Dexter's mind, if he can eliminate the last living monster from that shipping container, maybe the memory loses its power. Maybe the narrative finally feels complete. So he designs a plan that reflects that fantasy of control. Isolated shipping container, nighttime timeline, no witnesses, no interruptions, no messy variables. Lure Estrada out under the guise of a drug meet, sedate him, plastic up the walls, deliver the speech, do the cut, and disappear into the dark like he has 100 times before. It's the Bay Harbor Butcher ritual, but with a personal twist, the boy who survived the bloodbath finally deciding how the story ends. But the second Estrada steps into that space, the script starts slipping. Estrada is older, jumpier, and crucially, he remembers that night. He recognizes Dexter's name. He clocks the tension in his voice. Instead of moving like prey, he bolts, scrambles, forces Dexter to chase rather than orchestrate. The clean timeline stretches. The noise level spikes. The controlled environment becomes a maze of blind corners and bad sight lines. And underneath all of that is Dexter's subtle overconfidence. Because this feels personal, not procedural, he cuts corners. He underestimates Estrada's survival instinct. He overestimates his own ability to improvise. The focus is not just on a plan going sideways. It's on the psychology of a man who believes that if any kill is meant to work, it's this one. After all, hasn't his entire trajectory been building to this confrontation? Along the way, we see the hairline cracks widen. Estrada slips restraints. The timing with Deb's movements frays. Dexter has to stash, relocate, recalculate on the fly. Each adjustment pulls him further away from ritual and closer to raw damage control. What started as a symbolic exorcism is already veering toward operational failure. And then, LaGuerta arrives, headlights cutting through the dark. Her car door slamming, her voice echoing down the rows of metal and rust. In an instant, Dexter's private kill room becomes an active crime scene with a commanding officer on site. His plastic isn't up. His story isn't ready. His target is loose. The central question stops being, can Dexter finally finish Estrada? And becomes, can he keep LaGuerta from seeing what he really is? He's no longer directing a ritual. He's scrambling inside someone else's investigation. And the next move he makes in that container will decide which life he sacrifices to keep the rest of his world from collapsing. LaGuerta walks into that container yard with something Dexter has never really faced before. A counterplan built specifically for his psychology. He thinks he's improvising to contain a failure. She thinks she's walking into the final movement of an investigation she's been rebuilding in secret for an entire season. To keep this clear, we have to rewind to why she chooses Hector Estrada as bait in the first place. Estrada isn't just another name on a file. He's one of the men who butchered Dexter's mother in a shipping container. The primal scene that forged the code, the dark passenger. The whole internal myth of control. LaGuerta has already traced the Bay Harbor Butcher's victim profile, criminals who slipped the system, bodies dumped at sea, the meticulous ritual. When she finds that stray blood slide at the Travis Marshall scene, the central question for her stops being, did Dokes somehow fake his death? And becomes, who at Miami Metro has been living inside this pattern the whole time? From there, she works methodically. Old Marina records. The slice of life. Dump sites that line up a little too neatly with Dexter's work schedule. Surveillance footage that keeps putting him near bodies he supposedly only processed. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this point. LaGuerta doesn't need a confession. She just needs the pattern to hold under pressure. Estrada, as a living link between Dexter's childhood trauma and the Bay Harbor Butcher's known victims, is the perfect stress test. So she stages what looks, on paper, like routine police work. She gets Estrada out on a compassionate release angle. She wires him. She sets timelines, backup, and quiet tales that give her plausible deniability if anything goes wrong. On the surface, it's a standard high-risk informant operation. Underneath, it's a net designed to tighten around one man. Who else would take the bait of his mother's killer disappearing from the system? Who else would be so compelled to restore his sense of control that he'd break his own code about staying invisible? Dexter walks into that same space with the exact opposite assumption. He thinks he's hunting Estrada, that he's turning LaGuerta's risky move into a clean, contained kill room. Plastic, knives, Anesthetic, a story to frame Estrada as LaGuerta's would-be murderer. Stalk the target. Prepare the room. Erase the evidence. But while he's obsessing over the ritual, LaGuerta is tracking the trajectory of his choices, the timing of his disappearance from Deb's party, the GPS data, the sudden black hole in his alibi. The focus is not just on who's physically holding the gun in that container, it's on whose plan actually accounts for the presence of the other. LaGuerta assumes the Bay Harbor Butcher will surface through Estrada and builds in backup, documentation, a chain of custody. Dexter assumes Estrada is the only variable and never truly believes LaGuerta can get ahead of him. That's the paradox at the heart of this trap within a trap. Both think they're running the operation, but only one of them is following a plan built to survive the moment the other steps into the frame. And as we'll see in the next beat, the person who finally breaks that stalemate isn't Dexter or LaGuerta at all. It's Deb, walking into a scene neither of them fully planned for, forced to choose which world she's willing to let collapse. Deb walks into that shipping yard thinking she's interrupting one of Dexter's usual clean operations. Plastic, knife, a bad man on the table. Instead, she steps into the moment where Dexter's entire operating system collides head-on with LaGuerta's investigation and simply stops working. To keep this clear, Dexter's plan around Estrada is pure code logic. Identify a killer who deserves it. Confirm the history, one of the men who butchered his mother. Control the variables, lure Estrada out during a staged release, isolate him, kill him in a prepared location, and leave a crime scene that reads as self-contained. No witnesses. No loose ends. No trace that points back to the Bay Harbor Butcher. Every step assumes one thing: that law enforcement will behave predictably, accept the surface narrative, and move on. That's the psychology Harry trained into him. If the victim is guilty, if the tools are clean, if the timing avoids cameras and colleagues, the system won't look any deeper. The code isn't just about who Dexter can kill, it's a blueprint for how he expects the investigation to respond. He counts on detectives wanting closure, on bosses wanting cases wrapped, on evidence being read in straight lines rather than spirals. LaGuerta refuses that script. From the bloodslide at Travis Marshall's scene to the Marina records on the slice of life, she keeps asking the question Dexter's code never prepared for. What if the neat answer is wrong? She reopens Bay Harbor. She clears Dokes in her own mind. She uses Estrada not as a target, but as bait to test a theory. Suddenly, Dexter isn't the unseen predator shaping the investigation from the shadows. He's the variable she's actively manipulating. That's where the miscalculations start stacking. Dexter chooses the shipping yard because it feels familiar, a controlled echo of his old dump sites. But LaGuerta has already read that geography into her calculus. He misjudges the timing, assuming he can snatch Estrada and be gone before anyone notices, while she is literally clocking his movements and pulling warrants. He plans to frame Estrada as LaGuerta's would-be killer, but he fails to anticipate the most basic shift in the equation. He is now the prime suspect, so every bullet casing, every tire track, every phone ping will be read through the lens of Dexter Morgan as the Butcher. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this exact pivot point. The focus is not just on Dexter's failure to kill Estrada cleanly, but on how his beloved rules leave him with no move that doesn't incriminate him. If he kills Estrada, it looks like witness elimination. If he kills LaGuerta, it confirms her theory. If he walks away, he leaves two people alive who can expose him. The central question hanging over that dock is brutal. What does a code do when the only way to survive is to break it? And as we'll see in the next section, the person who answers that question isn't Dexter at all. And the person who answers it, at least for a moment, is Hector Estrada. We move from that dockside stalemate back into what Dexter thinks is his comfort zone: plastic, tools, a bound target, the classic ritual. To keep this clear, Dexter's plan is simple on paper. Lure Estrada to a shipping container, drug him, wake him up on the table, extract revenge for his mother's murder, and, conveniently, remove LaGuerta's bait from the board. Control restored. Narrative closed. Instead, the kill that refuses to happen begins with a tiny crack. Dexter is late. He's rattled by LaGuerta's arrest and release maneuver, by Deb's unraveling, by the investigation converging on his name. Emotion bleeds into logistics. When he finally gets Estrada on the table, there's too much talking, too much gloating, too much personal history contaminating the ritual. Dexter needs Estrada to understand why he's dying. That need costs him seconds. Those seconds are everything. Estrada stalls, plays confused, leans into Dexter's psychology. He asks questions, forces Dexter to answer, forces him to relive the shipping container where his mother died. While Dexter is narrating his trauma, Estrada is watching his hands, watching the knife, watching for any weakness in the restraints. The distraction works. The blade comes in just a little slower than usual. The tape isn't checked as carefully as usual. And when the struggle finally erupts, it's not a precise execution. It's a brawl. Plastic tears. Tools scatter. The container that was supposed to be a sealed stage becomes a chaotic maze of angles and shadows. Estrada slips free, slams into Dexter, and bolts through the door. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this image, a man who built his life on the illusion of perfect preparation, suddenly sprinting through his own kill room in panic, chasing a victim who now knows his face, his voice, his methods. This is where the failure becomes systemic. Dexter's emotional investment doesn't just slow his reaction time, it rewrites the entire risk profile. A dead Estrada is a loose end tied off. An escaped Estrada is a live wire. He knows Dexter targeted him. He can place Dexter at the docks. He can connect Dexter to LaGuerta's secret operation. In a season where LaGuerta is quietly rebuilding the Bay Harbor Butcher case from scratch, who is the one person she will absolutely listen to if he claims the butcher is still active? The focus is not just on the botched kill. It's on the new triangle Dexter has accidentally created. Himself, LaGuerta, and Estrada, all orbiting the same original crime. An escaped victim is more dangerous than a body because he carries context. He carries motive. He carries a story that contradicts the official narrative Dexter has been hiding behind for years. So when Estrada vanishes into the dark, we're left with a new kind of cliff. Estrada is out. LaGuerta is close. Dexter's carefully engineered trajectory toward justice has produced a witness instead of a corpse. And the next time those three paths cross, someone's version of reality is going to die. Estrada's footsteps fade into the dark, but on that dock, something else crystallizes. Amid the chaos, LaGuerta isn't overwhelmed. She's narrowing in. Where Dexter sees a plan collapsing, she sees a pattern snapping into focus. Let's kick things off with the physical scene in front of her. There's plastic sheeting, carefully laid. There are bindings, not improvised from whatever was nearby, but chosen, prepared, brought in. There's no sign of a robbery, no struggle over a wallet, no spray of wild gunfire. This isn't a drug rip-off gone bad. It's a room that was designed, an environment built for control. And when that kind of order explodes into a last-minute escape and a missing target, LaGuerta's psychology as a cop kicks in. This was an organized kill that failed, not street crime that escalated. To keep this clear, we have to remember what she's been carrying into this investigation. She's already held a blood slide from the Travis Marshall scene, that tiny piece of glass that should only exist in the Bay Harbor Butcher file. She's already pulled marina records, trace the slice of life, and watch Dexter's trajectory brush against dump sites again and again. So when she walks into a half-finished kill room built around Hector Estrada, a man tied directly to Dexter's origin story, she doesn't need to see Dexter to feel the Bay Harbor Butcher standing in the room with her. The central question in her mind isn't what happened here. It's, why does this look exactly like what I've already reconstructed? Plastic, isolation, a high-value target with a violent past, and timing that just happens to align with Dexter's movements. Each detail clicks against her off-book research. Each choice the killer made mirrors the code she's been reverse engineering from old files. We watch her do in seconds what took the original task force an entire season: map a fresh disaster onto an old pattern. Meanwhile, listen to the rest of the cops. They want to clear the perimeter, write it up as a blown drug hit. Get it off the board before New Year's paperwork buries them. No body, no suspect, no appetite for a sprawling conspiracy. The investigation is already drifting toward closure. But LaGuerta refuses the easy narrative. She questions the bindings. She questions why Estrada, of all people, would be here. She questions why this random scene looks like the Bay Harbor photos she's been staring at, alone, in her office. The focus is not just on exonerating Dokes anymore. In this moment, something shifts. The paradoxical thesis of her arc lands. By trying to clear a dead man, she's found a living predator. She realizes she may have just walked through his failed kill in real time, brushed past him in the dark, felt his control slip inches from her. And from here on, each major section of her plan is no longer about the past case file. It's about stopping an active hunter she now believes is watching her back. Because if the Bay Harbor Butcher is still out there, and his ritual just broke in front of her eyes, how long before he decides that LaGuerta herself is the next problem to be removed? LaGuerta walks out of that shipping yard alive, and something fundamental flips. Up to this point, Dexter's plans have failed in bursts and close calls, but his alibi game, that has been rock solid. Now, for the first time, we watch the illusion of that control start to buckle under someone who refuses to accept the convenient story. To keep this clear, we need to look at what Dexter usually relies on. His standard toolkit is almost boring in its predictability. Time-stamped late nights in the lab, a rigid commute between his apartment, Miami Metro, and home, a calendar full of kid pickups, crime scenes, and recovery meetings that all say, "You always know where I am." Add in friendly colleagues who unconsciously vouch for him, Masuka joking about Dexter's work ethic, Batista calling him dependable, Deb assuming he's the one person who can't be lying, and the psychology of the room does the rest. The plan is simple: be so consistently harmless that no one ever cross-checks the details. The central question becomes, what happens when someone finally does? LaGuerta doesn't just suspect, she audits his life. She starts cross-referencing his movements with shipping records, call logs, and surveillance footage in a way no one in this investigation has ever bothered to do. Old marina records line up Dexter's slice of life with historic dump sites. Toll booth cameras catch his car near the docks on nights that match Bay Harbor disappearances. Phone activity goes dark in the exact windows when his victims vanish. On paper, he's still the reliable blood guy. In the data, he's orbiting every major crime scene. After Estrada, those inconsistencies stop looking like noise and start forming a pattern. There are unexplained gaps in his shift logs when he claims to be working. There are convenient coincidences. Dexter just happens to be at the station when LaGuerta pulls a warrant, just happens to be nearby when suspects like Estrada slip through her fingers, just happens to have a plausible reason to be near the shipping yard the very night everything explodes. How many just happens can a single life sustain before the story collapses? Along the way, we see Dexter's response shift from proactive planning to panicked retrofitting. He's no longer calmly building airtight alibis in advance. He's scrambling to patch holes LaGuerta has already found. He forges timelines after the fact, plants evidence to redirect her investigation, and rewrites his own history with Dokes, with the marina, with that bloodslide at Travis Marshall's scene. The focus is not just on whether he can hide one more body, but whether he can keep reinventing his past faster than LaGuerta can tear it apart. And that's the unnerving turn. Dexter isn't steering the narrative anymore. He's chasing it. The man who once treated the code as a guarantee of safety is suddenly living inside someone else's case file, waiting to see which piece of his life she'll weaponize next. The question is no longer if his alibi will fail, but when and who will pay for that final break. Because LaGuerta isn't the only one following the trail he's left behind. Because LaGuerta isn't the only one following the trail he's left behind. Deborah is too. The difference is that she's chasing it to erase it. Let's kick things off with the shift we're not supposed to miss, even if the characters do. Dexter Morgan, the cop who used to drag Dexter toward the light, suddenly starts moving in the opposite direction. She lies about the church fire. She buries evidence. She makes erratic calls in the Travis Marshall investigation that clash with her entire professional trajectory. From the outside, this doesn't read as loyalty. It reads as guilt. To keep this clear, we need to sit in LaGuerta's psychology for a second. She's not just asking, who is the Bay Harbor Butcher? The central question becomes, who's acting like they know more than they should? And Deborah starts lighting up every radar. She was on the scene when Dexter killed Travis. She's the one who signs off on the church burning down. She's constantly, inexplicably, near the blast radius of Dexter's messes. And every time LaGuerta nudges the facts, Deb pushes back just a little too hard. So LaGuerta adjusts the plan. If she can't pry Dexter open directly, she'll test the armor around him. Along the way, we see her probes get quieter and sharper. Casual questions about the night Travis died. Offhand comments about the timing of the fire. A raised eyebrow when Deb forgets to mention that she was near the scene or that she altered a report. Each interaction is framed as concern, even friendship, but underneath it's an investigation into why Deb's behavior has collapsed so far from who she used to be, and Deb, trying to protect Dexter, keeps making that pattern worse. She destroys gas receipts that place her at the church. She lies about surveillance footage. She inserts herself into LaGuerta's Bay Harbor Butcher work under the pretense of helping, then steers it away from Dexter with a level of intensity that practically screams conflict of interest. In her mind, she's maintaining control. From LaGuerta's angle, she's watching a witness turn into an accomplice in real time. The focus is not just on what Deb says, but when she says it, and how often she contradicts herself. Short temper, sudden tears, wild swings between overconfidence and panic. These aren't random character beats, they're exactly what a seasoned cop like LaGuerta expects when someone is lying to protect family. Each major section will, for LaGuerta, be another test, press Deb on the church, watch her flinch, bring up Dokes, watch her overcompensate, mention Dexter, watch her shut down. By the time LaGuerta starts pulling warrants and resurrecting old case files, she doesn't need Deborah to confess to anything specific. She just needs a crack. One breakdown in an interview. One inconsistency under oath. One moment where Deb's love for Dexter outweighs her training, and the whole structure of his carefully engineered double life collapses from the inside. Because if LaGuerta can't nail the butcher, she can flip his shield. The question becomes, when the pressure finally peaks, does Deb protect the code or herself? And that question doesn't just hang over Deb's conscience. It drives LaGuerta straight back to the one place Dexter thought he'd erased perfectly. the burned-out church where Travis Marshall died. From Dexter plunging a knife into Travis on that altar to the gasoline, the fire, and the official conclusion of suicide by religious fanaticism, the church fire is framed as Dexter's masterstroke. He kills the doomsday killer, stages a ritualistic tableau, and lets the flames obliterate the kill room, the plastic, the tools, the truth. Case closed. Dark passenger satisfied. No loose ends. Except LaGuerta is looking for loose ends now, and the central question for her investigation becomes painfully simple. If the Bay Harbor Butcher is still alive, where would his work show up next? To keep this clear, she doesn't start with some abstract theory. She starts with a tiny, physical mistake, the blood slide found at the Travis Marshall scene. That slide is a relic from a previous season of Dexter's life, a ritual detail that only ever existed in one case file, Bay Harbor Butcher. When LaGuerta pulls it out of the ash and debris, the trajectory of the entire story bends. This is not a random revisit, it's a loop closing. She goes back to the church records, the response logs, the timelines. Why did the fire department arrive when they did? Why was Dexter Morgan, a high-ranking officer, first on scene instead of patrol? Why is the one location that could have clarified Travis's final hours conveniently reduced to cinders? With just enough left to tell a neat story, but not enough to challenge it? LaGuerta lives in those anomalies. The response time that doesn't quite track. The way Deb's arrival overlaps with Dexter's supposed alibi. The fact that a killer obsessed with public spectacle suddenly chooses to die alone in an abandoned church that just happens to burn so hot, so fast, that any nuanced forensic reconstruction is impossible. Control for Dexter, but for LaGuerta, a pattern of intentional destruction. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this paradox. Every perfect cover-up Dexter engineers creates an unnatural absence. No witnesses, no physical evidence, no messy human variables, and those clean voids, when lined up, begin to glow. Along the way, LaGuerta quietly reopens Travis Marshall, not as a standalone outlier, but as the most recent entry in a long-running Bay Harbor ledger. Each major section will show her connecting that single blood slide to the earlier dump sites, to the marina, to Dexter's movements. By the time she's done walking the burned church in her mind, Travis isn't an endpoint. He's a bridge between the old investigation that died with Dokes and the very real, very current predator working inside Miami Metro. And that's the real collapse. Dexter's proudest perfect scene doesn't disappear. It gets tagged, filed, and mentally pinned by LaGuerta. One more data point in an internal case file where every miracle coincidence, every erased crime scene, every vanished killer now whispers the same name. That internal case file inside LaGuerta's head doesn't stay theoretical for long. The moment she tentatively lets Dexter's name slip into the conversation, we watch the investigation stop being about patterns on paper and start colliding with the department's psychology. The first time she floats it, it's almost offhand. A question wrapped in a shrug. What if Dokes wasn't the Bay Harbor Butcher? What if we were wrong? And when she nudges the idea that Dexter's proximity to the original case is interesting, the room doesn't lean in. It recoils. Angel looks hurt. Matthews is irritated. Deb is outright hostile. The golden boy in the lab is the one person nobody wants to picture on a kill table. From a command perspective, it plays like professional skepticism. They tell her she's reopening old wounds, chasing ghosts, disrespecting Dokes' memory. Underneath that, though, we can feel something more primal. The central question isn't, is Dexter guilty? It's, can we afford for Dexter to be guilty? To keep this clear, Dexter isn't just another colleague. He is institutional comfort. He solves impossible cases, stays late, brings coffee, plays the awkward, unthreatening tech who makes everyone else look sharper. The Bay Harbor Butcher narrative, with Dokes as the monster, gave Miami Metro closure and a hero's glow. Dexter benefits from that story, but so does everyone who signed off on it. Admitting the failure would mean admitting that the code they trusted, their procedures, their instincts, their promotions, was built on a lie. So when LaGuerta brings them bloodslide evidence, marina records, shipping container overlaps, the response isn't curiosity, it's defense. She's accused of being obsessed, of not letting Dokes rest, of projecting her guilt over his death onto Dexter. The focus is not just on disproving her theory, but on discrediting her psychology. If LaGuerta is emotional, then the investigation doesn't have to be rationally confronted. And that's where her isolation hardens. Each major section will show a plan of Dexter's collapsing, but here we see a different collapse. The support structure around LaGuerta erodes precisely as her evidence gets stronger. She realizes that going after Dexter means going against Deb, against Angel, against the brass who promoted her. She's not simply hunting a serial killer. She's fighting a culture that needs its miracle analyst to stay clean so everyone else can sleep at night. Along the way, the more her findings point inward, the more everyone around her insists the threat must be out there. Another copycat, another unknown predator. Anyone but the man in the pastel shirts. That tension becomes the engine of the season, evidence tightening around Dexter's throat while the institution keeps yanking the noose away. And the open question hanging over every scene is simple and brutal. When the facts say one thing and the system needs another, which reality wins? And as that question hangs over Miami Metro, Dexter does something revealing. He doesn't just wait to see which reality wins. He starts trying to rig reality the way he always has, by turning the investigation into prey. Let's kick things off with the image that really marks the shift. Dexter in his car outside LaGuerta's house, engine off, watching her silhouette move from room to room. No kill tools, no plastic, just a hunter studying a hunter. From there, it escalates fast, shadowing her to off-book meetings, clocking her quiet visits to storage units. Slipping into her office to skim through reopened Bay Harbor Butcher files and any reference to Hector Estrada. He bugs her movements the way he'd map a serial killer's routine, listening for those two names that threaten his entire constructed life, Bay Harbor and Estrada. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between what Dexter thinks he's doing and what he's actually doing. On the surface, this is just counter-surveillance, a smart move. But underneath, Dexter is importing his familiar plan, stalk, study, control. He starts building a psychological profile of LaGuerta, the way he would with a murderer. What are her compulsions? What patterns does she follow when she thinks no one's looking? How far will she break the rules to get justice for Dokes? To keep this clear, Dexter isn't just gathering intel, he's drafting contingencies. If she gets too close to the marina records, plant doubt. If she pushes Deb, fabricate an alibi. If she uses Estrada as bait, flip the trap and make Estrada look like her would-be killer. Each major section will, in his mind, end with him one step ahead, nudging her back toward the institutional story that keeps him safe. But here's where his psychology misreads the battlefield. LaGuerta isn't a lone predator moving in secret. She's embedded in a web of rules, bureaucracy, and politics that don't map cleanly onto his usual targets. She can subpoena, leak, and convene task forces. She can drag Deb into internal affairs meetings, confront Batista with marina logs, and weaponize the very systems Dexter has always hidden behind. How do you anticipate a threat that can multiply itself with a single memo? The focus is not just on his operational moves, but on the structural mismatch. Dexter's code is designed for enclosed spaces. One victim, one room, one night. LaGuerta operates in open daylight, with paperwork and press conferences that outlive any single confrontation. So even as he tracks her, even as he watches her argue with Matthews or pore over shipping records, the control he thinks he has is already slipping. By the time he's following her through shipping yards and abandoned lots, the symmetry is complete. She's running an investigation on him, he's running an investigation on her. Each is convinced the other is the existential threat that must be neutralized first. And the terrifying question as we move into the Estrada setup is simple. When Hunter and Hunter finally step into the same kill zone, whose plan actually survives contact with reality? When we talk about LaGuerta as a threat, it's tempting to picture her as a presence in Dexter's life. Annoying, persistent, fallible, but the real danger isn't LaGuerta the person. It's LaGuerta the paper trail. Hidden in her desk, off the official books, is a case file that should not exist. Photos of Bay Harbor dump sites. Copies of marina records. Snapshots of blood slides and crime scene grids. Timelines that braid together Dexter's work schedule, his boat movements, and key Bay Harbor Butcher kills. And threaded through that collage, like a name written in invisible ink finally developed under of light, is Dexter Morgan, appearing in places it should never logically appear. To keep this clear, LaGuerta isn't just circling his name with a red pen because she doesn't like him. She's matching the slice of life to dump sites. She's noting that Dexter was on the task force, that he processed evidence that mysteriously went nowhere, that he was present at Travis Marshall's scene where she finds a blood slide identical to the Bay Harbor pattern. This is not a vibe-based suspicion. It's a structured argument. And that structure is exactly why the file is so dangerous. As long as everything lives in her head, Dexter can manage it, manipulate conversations, redirect the investigation, exploit office politics. But the moment she prints photos, compiles victim lists, and locks them in a folder, her theory becomes portable, shareable, survivable beyond her own body. If she's transferred, the file can travel. If she's killed, the file can be discovered. How do you dismember a paper trail? In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this idea. Every time Dexter believes he's regained control, the world quietly generates a record he can't fully erase. LaGuerta's off-book dossier is the Bay Harbor Butcher case, resurrected without a task force, without oversight, without his ability to monitor every lead. It's the investigation he doesn't know he's already inside. Watch his psychology when he realizes what she's built. He goes to her office expecting to counter a hunch to manage a political rival. Instead, he opens that folder and sees his life reorganized as evidence. Photos of Dokes, satellite images of the Everglades cabin, shipping manifests, Estrada's name resurfacing from his childhood trauma. These are not random clippings. These are the beats of his entire trajectory, re-edited into a prosecution memo. For the first time, he understands that someone else could follow this logic and arrive at the same terrifying conclusion. The central question shifts in that moment. It's no longer, can Dexter outsmart LaGuerta? It becomes, can Dexter outpace the spread of her theory? Because once a case file exists, one conversation is all it takes for it to become official. One captain she trusts. One IA contact. One judge willing to sign a warrant. How long before that off-book folder turns into an on-the-record collapse of his carefully curated double life? As we move into the Estrada setup, that ticking clock pressure is everywhere. The file is sitting in a drawer, waiting. Every move Dexter makes from this point on isn't just about avoiding LaGuerta in person. It's about racing a piece of paper he can't hear, can't see, and might not be able to destroy in time. That silent folder in LaGuerta's desk is dangerous. But what really threatens Dexter's plan is something messier, less controllable, and sitting right across from LaGuerta in every interview room, Dexter Morgan's unraveling ability to lie. Let's kick things off with the church. LaGuerta knows Deb rescued Dexter from the Doomsday Killer crime scene, yet the timeline never quite fits. Deb claims she arrived just in time to pull Dexter out of the fire, but security footage, radio logs, and the burn patterns in the church tell a different story. There's too much time unaccounted for, too much calm in Dexter's demeanor when first responders see him. For a seasoned investigator, that gap isn't just a detail, it's an entry point. To keep this clear, LaGuerta doesn't confront Deb head-on at first. She tests her. Small, casual questions in hallways and bullpen chats. You said you smelled gasoline right away, right? So where were you standing? Remind me, when did you call it in? Each one sounds like routine follow-up, but they're really probes, feeling for rehearsed answers versus genuine memory. Real memory meanders. It hesitates, circles back, sometimes contradicts itself before settling. Deb's version stays too consistent, too polished, like a story she's been replaying in her head on a loop. Then we move to the boat. LaGuerta quietly pulls old marina records, gas receipts, and slice-of-life docking logs. When she circles back to Deb, she asks about that night on the water like it's an afterthought. Did Deb remember which car she took? Why the mileage doesn't match the report? Why her phone pings near the marina when she swore she went straight home? The central question isn't just where Deb was. It's whether Deb's life still has the loose, chaotic edges of a real cop's schedule, or the rigid, over-controlled pattern of someone maintaining a cover story. And Deb's psychology betrays her. When LaGuerta presses, Deb doesn't just answer. She over-answers. She launches into explanations no one requested. Volunteers emotional context that feels performative spikes into anger at perfectly reasonable procedural follow-ups. Anger, deflection, over-explanation. To us, they read as Deb being Deb, a pressure cooker on the verge of blowing. To LaGuerta, in the middle of an off-book investigation, they read as classic leakage from someone protecting a secret bigger than herself. In this video, we're going to keep tracing that trajectory, because each major section will show how Dexter's illusion of control depends on someone else holding the line. Here, that someone is Deb. Along the way, LaGuerta starts comparing Deb's statements against her own growing map of Bay Harbor adjacent events. The shipping containers, the dump sites, the miraculous coincidences that always seem to orbit Dexter. So Deb faces an impossible pressure gradient. Does she double down and fuse herself to Dexter's fate, or does she fracture under LaGuerta's quiet, relentless pattern recognition? The next time LaGuerta sits her down, it won't be casual questions in a hallway. It will be a direct accusation, backed by evidence Deb can't explain without tearing Dexter's entire world open. LaGuerta doesn't just have suspicions anymore. She has a story, and in her mind, it's airtight. From the ashes of Dokes' death to the rooftop where Travis Marshall burns, to a forgotten butcher named Hector Estrada disappearing off the grid, she rebuilds the entire trajectory of Dexter's double life. To keep this clear, she starts at the official ending, the Bay Harbor Butcher case, closed with Dokes dead in a cabin explosion. A tragic hero turned secret monster. File it, mourn him, move on. But then, at the Travis Marshall scene, a single blood slide glints under fluorescent light. That tiny rectangle is a time bomb. It's the exact ritual detail that defined the Bay Harbor investigation. a pattern supposedly buried with Dokes. If the butcher died years ago, why is his signature sitting in the middle of Dexter's final doomsday crime scene? So she works backwards. She reopens the case off the books. She rereads every report Dexter ever touched, rewalks dump sites that his analysis helped discover. She pulls marina records and sees the slice of life parked in proximity to multiple disposal areas. One boat, one analyst, one recurring shadow at every major turn. The central question stops being who was the butcher and becomes who benefited most from the case closing when it did. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this move, LaGuerta taking what everyone else calls coincidence and treating it as design. She notices Dexter at the Travis scene before backup arrives. She clocks his uncanny access to victims and suspects over season after season. She sees how the department's faith in his forensics, in Harry's old badge, creates institutional blind spots he can hide inside. The focus is not just on the blood slide, but on the psychology of a killer who builds his cover story into the very machinery that's supposed to catch him. When Estrada surfaces, everything snaps into place. Estrada is tied to Dexter's childhood trauma. Estrada is suddenly released, then suddenly vanishes. Who else would care that much about an old butcher except the son of his victim and the Bay Harbor Butcher who preys on predators? LaGuerta doesn't see a random fugitive. She sees bait Dexter cannot resist. So when she crashes Dexter's carefully staged kill room plan, finds Estrada half-prepped and Dexter scrambling for control, it doesn't feel like a lucky break. It feels like confirmation. Accusing him is career suicide. She knows that. She's overturning a closed hero case, calling Dokes innocent, and naming a beloved colleague a serial killer. What happens to a captain who burns that much institutional capital and fails? What happens if she's right and the department buries her anyway? But for LaGuerta, this is no longer a theory to test. It's a reality she feels morally obligated to expose, no matter the consequences. The Bay Harbor Butcher isn't a ghost from a past season. He's sitting in her bullpen. And the next move in her plan is simple and deadly. Force Dexter into the open, or die trying. So Dexter pivots. If he can't erase LaGuerta's investigation, he'll try to erase LaGuerta as a serious voice inside it. This is the moment the plan shifts from damage control to character assassination, and it tells us more about his psychology than any kill room. He doesn't confront her head on. He goes sideways. In the bullpen, in quiet conversations with Batista and Matthews, we watch him plant tiny, deniable doubts. He emphasizes how long she's been carrying the guilt over Dokes. He reminds them she was engaged to him, that this Bay Harbor reopening is personal. From a distance, it sounds compassionate. Up close, it's a strategy. Make every piece of evidence look like grief-driven obsession rather than sober analysis. To keep this clear, Dexter isn't arguing with her facts. He's reframing her motives. When she connects the Travis Marshall blood slide back to the old case, he doesn't try to disprove the slide. He leans on his likable persona, the reliable blood guy who has been through a lot and only wants to help. Who are they going to trust? The calm, affable analyst who's held the department together for season after season. Or the captain who seems fixated on resurrecting a disgraced dead man? We see him highlight every coincidence as paranoia. LaGuerta links his boat to the dump sites. Dexter suggests she's seeing patterns because she needs Dokes to be innocent. She questions his connection to Estrada. He frames it as her reaching for ghosts from his mother's case. Each major section of her argument gets recast as a symptom. She's not building a trajectory of evidence. She's cracking under the weight of old mistakes. And this is where the ethical line doesn't just blur, it snaps. Up to this point, Dexter has told himself He's defending his secret to keep killing by the code. Now the focus is not just on survival. It's on actively destroying the credibility of the one person in the room who is actually right. He weaponizes her history with Dokes, her ambition, her moral urgency, turning them into flaws to be exploited. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that pattern. When cornered, Dexter doesn't just neutralize threats, he corrodes people. The central question becomes brutal. If LaGuerta is framed as unstable, what happens to every truth she's uncovered? Dexter's plan leaves no middle ground. Either she is discredited so thoroughly that Bay Harbor dies with her reputation, or she gathers enough momentum that his mask finally breaks. One of them is going to collapse in public. Along the way, every conversation, every sideways comment tightens that binary. Someone walks out of this as the exposed fraud. We just don't know yet whether it's the cop chasing ghosts or the ghost sitting quietly at his microscope, waiting for his last safeguard to fail. And from that moment, the question stops being whether LaGuerta is right and becomes how long the system can keep pretending she's wrong. Her certainty, Dexter's improvisations, Deborah's fraying self, all start spiraling around the same drain. LaGuerta has the blood slide from Travis Marshall's crime scene, a detail that should not exist anymore, a ritual that died with the Bay Harbor investigation. From a tiny square of glass, she rebuilds an entire mythology, Dokes as the scapegoat, the marina as the artery, the ocean as the graveyard. To keep this clear, she's not guessing. She's reconstructing a failed plan in reverse. Meanwhile, Dexter is doing what he always does when control slips. He doubles down on the code, rewrites the rules on the fly, and convinces himself that one more careful kill will reset the board. But every countermove exposes a new seam. Marina records point back to the slice of life. Old dump sites line up with his work schedule. Hector Estrada, one of his mother's killers, becomes both a personal vendetta and a tactical solution. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that collision between private motive and public investigation, because that's where his illusion of control truly collapses. And then there's Deb. She's the one person who should be able to pull a brake. Instead, she's white-knuckling two incompatible realities, the brother she loves and the cop she swore to be. LaGuerta shows her gas receipts, surveillance footage, timelines that put Deb's patrol car in the exact wrong places. Internal complaints, quiet warnings, back-channel conversations in hallways and parking lots, all the institutional pressure valves get opened, tested, and finally stripped. None of it works. The machine can't process a Bay Harbor Butcher who wears a badge. So the options narrow. LaGuerta arrests Dexter at his own apartment and calls him what he is. The department shrugs, then recoils, then retreats. No one wants to relitigate a closed case that already took one decorated sergeant's reputation. The focus is not just on evidence now, but on liability, on careers, on who gets burned if this investigation keeps going. That's why the confrontation has to leave the fluorescent safety of Miami Metro and move somewhere else. It moves back to the docks. Back to the shipping yard. The birthplace of the Bay Harbor legend, where rusted containers and echoing corridors once guaranteed Dexter anonymity. Stalk the target, prepare the kill room, feed the ocean. That old triad feels almost nostalgic. But now, those same rows of steel are a maze where two stories are converging. LaGuerta's crusade to clear Dokes' name and Dexter's last-ditch plan to turn Estrada into a frame job. Each major section will keep tracing how these failed plans stack, but here, they finally compress into one night. LaGuerta follows the pattern to the yard, believing she's about to expose the butcher. Dexter lures Estrada there, believing he's about to erase his last loose end. Deborah races in, believing she can still save something. 3 trajectories. 1 dark grid of containers. They're all walking toward the same narrow clearing, each convinced they're about to end someone else's story. The central question is, whose story actually ends there? LaGuerta walking into that shipping yard is not a twist. It's the endpoint of an investigation that never really stopped, a case that refused to stay buried, no matter how clean Dexter thought his ocean dumps looked. To keep this clear, we have to rewind. Back to Dokes. Back to the Bay Harbor Butcher Task Force, built on Dexter's own blood-slides and dump sites. When Dokes dies in that cabin explosion, the department accepts the narrative. Case closed, monster unmasked, tragedy filed away. But LaGuerta never fully buys it. She shelves her doubt, but she doesn't erase it. It just waits, like an open file in the back of her mind. Years later, she finds that single blood slide at the Travis Marshall scene, one tiny rectangle of glass in a puddle of apocalypse. That's the pattern interrupt. The Bay Harbor Butcher's signature detail, suddenly resurrected at a crime scene that should have nothing to do with a dead suspect. From a slide on a rooftop AC unit to an old friend's name on a discredited case file, her brain connects the circuitry. Dokes was meticulous, but he wasn't a forensic tech. He didn't process crime scenes. Dexter did. In this video, we're going to keep circling that idea. The more Dexter tries to control the narrative, the more readable he becomes to the one cop who refuses to look away. LaGuerta quietly reopens Bay Harbor, pulls marina records, tracks the slice of life, brushing past multiple dump sites. She notices the convenient way Dexter always seems adjacent to the worst violence in Miami. Each coincidence is another fracture in his perfect system. And Dexter keeps feeding her. He keeps trophies, he improvises kills, he underestimates her. When she digs up Hector Estrada as the missing link to Dexter's childhood trauma, he doesn't see a prosecutor assembling a case. He sees another loose end to cut. His plan to use Estrada as bait to stage a fake attempt on LaGuerta's life is supposed to restore control. Instead, it confirms every instinct she's had since that blood slide turned up. Look at the trajectory. Dokes' death plants the doubt. The Travis slide reignites the investigation. The marina records, the GP's data, the gas receipts, the surveillance footage of Deb's mysterious detours, all of it tightens the loop. By the time she arrests Dexter in his own apartment and calls him the Bay Harbor Butcher to his face, this isn't a wild theory. It's a near-complete prosecution, missing only the final, irrefutable moment. That's what the shipping yard really is. Not an isolated crisis, but the inevitable climax of a case LaGuerta has been building for years. She arrives with Estrada alive, with a gun in her hand, with the story already written. Dexter is the butcher, Deb is covering for him, and this container is the last chapter. The paradox is brutal. The same ritual consistency that makes Dexter feel safe, the code, the slides, the plastic, the boats, gives LaGuerta a trail of breadcrumbs straight to his kill room. So when Deb steps into that clearing and has to choose, she isn't just choosing between her brother and her boss. She's choosing between letting LaGuerta finish the investigation she's almost solved, or blowing a hole in the last illusion of justice in this world. How close did Dexter actually come to losing everything there? And how much of that collapse did he engineer himself without ever realizing it? Deb standing in that clearing, because LaGuerta didn't just get lucky. She followed a trail Dexter thought was invisible. A trail he himself laid down every time he followed the code. And that's the twist we need to sit with. The thing that made him feel safest is exactly what put him in LaGuerta's crosshairs. Let's kick things off with the mechanics. Slides, plastic, dismemberment. Ocean dumps from the slice of life. On their own, each piece looks like control, a standardized plan designed to erase chaos. But put them together over years of kills, and you don't get secrecy, you get a data set. The code doesn't just guide Dexter's psychology, it standardizes his behavior into a ritual pattern a patient investigation can map. To keep this clear, think about LaGuerta's entry point. She finds a single blood slide at the Travis Marshall crime scene. That one shard of glass is supposed to be Dexter's private trophy, an internal checkbox that the kill followed Harry's rules. Instead, it's a continuity error in the official story of the Bay Harbor Butcher. Those slides were unique to that case. They were supposed to have ended with Dokes' death. So why is one sitting in a church linked to Dexter's latest hero cop victory? The focus is not just on LaGuerta hunting a monster, but on her doing what Dexter never expected, treating him as a man of habit. She reopens the Bay Harbor investigation, not to psychoanalyze evil, but to reconcile logistics. Marina records dump sites, the slice of life parked near multiple body discoveries. She doesn't need to understand the dark passenger. She only needs to understand that whoever is doing this follows the same operational script over and over, no matter the season or the target. And Dexter helps her. Every time he clings to the code, he narrows his own options. He insists on the same plastic-wrapped rooms, the same careful dismemberment, the same ocean disposal. Even when the context shifts, Dokes watching him, Trinity imploding his family, Lumen forcing him to improvise, Dexter's response is always to double down on ritual. The code is his answer to every problem, so he never truly learns to adapt. Why redesign the plan when Harry already solved it? The central question becomes, who was this system actually built to defeat? Dexter optimizes for Harry's imagined cops, faceless investigators who follow procedure and accept the Bay Harbor Butcher file as closed. He never plans for LaGuerta, who knows his history, who remembers Dokes, who notices Deb's gas receipts and surveillance footage, and asks why the Morgans keep showing up at the edges of these crimes. He's playing chess against a rulebook, she's playing against Dexter. By the time she uses Hector Estrada as bait, the code has become a cage. Dexter can only respond in one way: build another kill room, stage another neat tableau, try to frame Estrada as LaGuerta's would-be killer. And because that's exactly what LaGuerta predicts, she's there to crash the plan. The more he leans on the ritual to feel safe, the more predictable he becomes when cornered. That's the central irony of the shipping yard showdown. Dexter believes the code will save him from crossing his final line: never kill an innocent. But every safeguard that was supposed to prevent that collapse has already failed. His trophies exposed him. His dump sites linked him. His refusal to change funneled him into a single horrific choice: kill LaGuerta or let his entire life's mythology detonate in public. Along the way, the code stopped being armor and became destiny. Once Deb pulls the trigger, we can't unsee it. Harry's rules didn't just fail to protect Dexter from exposure. They actively scripted the exact scenario he thought they would prevent. So where does someone like Dexter even go after that, when the only system he trusts has led him straight to moral freefall? We end up at that shipping yard because every safeguard Harry designed has already failed in slow motion. Now it all condenses into one frame: Dexter with a gun on LaGuerta, LaGuerta bleeding and begging Deb to see the truth, Deb standing there with her arm shaking between badge and brother. No more code, no more investigation, just a single, irreversible decision. Let's kick things off with the emotional geometry of that scene. Dexter has already made his plan: frame Estrada, stage LaGuerta as collateral damage, cleanly remove the only cop who rebuilt Bay Harbor from scratch. He's calm, almost professional, explaining to Deb that this is the only way to regain control. Across from him, LaGuerta isn't bargaining for her life in abstract terms. She's prosecuting a case. She calls Dexter the Bay Harbor Butcher. She reminds Deb of the gas receipts, the surveillance footage, the blood slide at Travis Marshall's scene. She names what we've been watching for seasons. Dexter is the problem, not the solution. To keep this clear, Deb's not walking into that warehouse as a blank slate. Every compromise she's made is already hanging in the air, covering up the church with Travis Marshall's body, lying to Batista, shredding LaGuerta's warrant trail, choosing to interpret the code as a damaged but necessary tool instead of what it really is, the architecture of Dexter's denial. Each earlier small betrayal of procedure was sold to us as temporary, as something Deb could walk back once things calmed down. Here, there is no procedural workaround left. There is no clever report she can file that saves both the badge and the brother. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this point. LaGuerta's real victory is not whether she lives. It's that she drags the show's moral universe into the open and forces Deb to speak its contradiction with a bullet. When Deb screams stop, and then pivots the gun, she's not choosing between a good man and a corrupt cop. She's choosing between the story Dexter told her about himself and the evidence LaGuerta has assembled, piece by piece, from his failures. The central question becomes painfully simple. Who does Deb believe? And here's the collapse. Dexter's plan doesn't fail because he misjudges LaGuerta's movements or loses track of Estrada. It fails because the only way to survive is to let Deb do the one thing the series spent years insisting she would never do. She executes an unarmed, innocent colleague to protect a serial killer she now knows, fully and consciously, is guilty. The focus is not just on Dexter evading exposure. It's on the cost. Deb's psychology snapping into a shape Harry's code never accounted for. From this moment on, Dexter's victory is indistinguishable from moral defeat. He's alive. His secret is safe. But the person he claimed to love most has been weaponized by his existence. Along the way, the show stops being about whether Dexter can keep killing and starts being about whether there's anything left of Deb to save. That's the trajectory the finale locks in. And the next phase has to answer. What does a world look like where Deborah Morgan has crossed that line and still has to wake up tomorrow? Deb pulls the trigger, LaGuerta drops, and for a second, the show frames it like a twisted victory. The threat is neutralized. The secret is safe. Dexter's plan worked. But if we pause there, what exactly did he win? On paper, they win everything. Dexter and Deb walk out of that shipping yard with a cover story so neat it could be taught at the academy. LaGuerta went rogue, tried to free Estrada, and Deb heroically intervened. The ballistics line up. The scene is staged with care. The reports get filed, and the department nods along. To keep this clear, the paperwork is pristine. The psychology behind it is rubble. We watch Dexter do what he always does after a close call, reassert control through procedure. Clean the scene. Align the narrative. Comfort Deb with the idea that this was necessary, that it fits some higher version of the code. But her 1,000-yard stare tells the truth. Deb isn't processing a tactical choice. She's absorbing a moral collapse. She killed an innocent cop to save a serial killer. How do you clock in at Miami Metro after that? And LaGuerta's investigation doesn't just vanish because her body does. She's already reopened the Bay Harbor Butcher file. She's already pulled marina records, traced the slice of life, and dragged Dexter into interrogation in front of his colleagues. Those ripples stay in the water. There are detectives who remember her doubts about Dokes. There are notes, files, half-finished threads in evidence boxes that don't quite match the official ending. The case is closed again, but it doesn't feel closed. The real open wound is Deb. She becomes the living residue of LaGuerta's suspicion. Every panic attack, every relapse, every time she looks at Dexter like she's seeing a stranger, we're watching LaGuerta's accusation replayed. Dexter is the problem everyone keeps working around. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that line because it's what turns this apparent win into the start of the end. Once Dexter orchestrates the death of an innocent colleague, the code loses its last claim to authority. If Harry's rules could stretch to cover this, what can't they cover? From that point on, every kill is haunted. His justifications sound thinner. His plans get sloppier. The trajectory shifts from, can he keep the secret, to why is he still pretending this is about justice at all? The central question is no longer whether Dexter can avoid exposure. It's whether there's any version of himself left that isn't a lie. The focus is not just on LaGuerta dying, it's on her idea surviving. She almost exposes him, fails, and still wins thematically. Along the way, every relationship Dexter touches, Hannah, Harrison, even his fantasy of a clean escape, will echo her charge that he is the rot in the foundation. And if that's true, what does it even mean when he runs? And once we accept that LaGuerta's idea survives her, we have to zoom out and admit something uncomfortable. She isn't an anomaly in Dexter's life. She's the latest entry in a long, ugly pattern where the monster slips. Someone notices. And the whole illusion of control almost collapses. Let's kick things off with Dokes, a cop who doesn't buy the shy blood guy act for a single second. He stalks Dexter, catches him with tranquilizers and garbage bags, literally watches him dump a body. No elaborate task force, no algorithm, just instinct and proximity. Dexter's response? He panics, improvises outside the code, and cages Dokes in a remote cabin. From a narrative distance, that's not a master plan. That's a hostage crisis. Then, Lundy arrives, the quiet center of the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. He doesn't even know Dexter's name at first. He just follows the evidence Dexter thought he'd erased. The ocean dumps, the dismemberment patterns, the bloodslide ritual. The investigation is built out of Dexter's supposed safeguards. Again, Dexter underestimates a man who simply keeps looking. Again, he survives only because Leela blows everything up, literally, turning Dokes into a scapegoat and teaching Dexter the worst possible lesson: chaos will cover for him. To keep this clear, watch how the mechanism repeats. Dexter believes the code is airtight. He assumes he can predict people. He cuts one corner, leaves one trace, trusts one fantasy about control. A human being, not the system, finds the seam. Leela reads his neediness and addiction to danger. Trinity reads his hunger for a normal family. Each time, Dexter steps outside Harry's rules to fix the problem, and each time the consequences get bigger. Trinity is the turning point. Dexter infiltrates his life, thinks he can learn from him, maybe even manage him. Instead, Trinity walks right past all of Dexter's precautions and kills Rita in his own house. The central question stops being, can Dexter keep killing? And becomes, can Dexter's world survive his attempts to keep killing? The answer, season by season, is no. And that's where LaGuerta feels like the culmination of this trajectory, rather than a late-game twist. She has institutional power, Lundy never fully used, personal loyalty to Dokes, and a stubbornness that doesn't break when the department tells her to drop it. She finds the stray bloodslide at Travis Marshall's scene. She quietly reopens Bay Harbor. She pulls marina records, connects the slice of life to dump sites, uses Estrada as bait, and walks Dexter into handcuffs in his own apartment. In this video, we're going to keep asking, is this what a mastermind looks like? A man whose every plan requires last-second improvisation, collateral damage, and someone else dying to preserve his secret? Or is Dexter a barely contained disaster who just happens to stay one step ahead until the one person who refuses to look away finally catches up? Because if this is the pattern, LaGuerta isn't the exception. She's the warning flare for everything that comes next. So when we pull back from the Estrada ambush, the shipping yard, and that final gunshot, the pattern is brutally clear. LaGuerta didn't just almost catch Dexter. She proved that his entire story has a built-in expiration date. A monster can only stay hidden as long as everyone around him agrees, consciously or not, to look away. LaGuerta is what happens when someone refuses. From the moment she saw that Travis Marshall bloodslide, she treated it not as a weird coincidence, but as a crack in the narrative Miami Metro had already accepted. Dokes as the Bay Harbor Butcher. Case closed. Career saved. But one slide on one crime scene pulls the thread, and she keeps pulling even as it threatens her reputation, her relationships, and the department's illusion of control. To keep this clear, her entire suspicion timeline plays like a single, sustained prosecution. She reopens the Bay Harbor investigation in secret. She rechecks dump sites and marina records until the slice of life and Dexter's movements line up just a little too neatly. She uses Estrada not just as bait, but as a live experiment. If Dexter shows up where Estrada is, if bodies move when he moves, the theory holds. Then she pushes it all the way to a warrant, an arrest in his own apartment, and a public accusation that names him for what he is. That's not a hunch. That's a case. And it only fails because Deb breaks. The Estrada trap collapses when Dexter's plan to frame LaGuerta as a would-be murderer runs into the one variable he can't fully script, his sister's psychology. The shipping yard showdown is the logical endpoint of every compromise he's ever demanded from her. She stands between LaGuerta and Dexter, between badge and blood, and chooses the person she loves over the principles she swore to uphold. LaGuerta does everything right as a cop. Deb does everything wrong as a cop, and everything understandable as a human being. Which choice feels more inevitable to us? In this video, we're going to keep returning to that tension. The focus is not just on Dexter's apparent wins, but on how narrow each escape really is when we factor in the lies, the collateral damage. The people he bends until they snap. LaGuerta is the clearest example of what happens when someone refuses to bend at all. She doesn't accept the code. She doesn't accept the cover story. She follows the investigation wherever it leads, even when it leads to a colleague she's known for years. So, as we move forward through every season, each major section will ask us to reframe Dexter's victories as near failures propped up by other people's compromises. Harry hiding the truth, Leela killing Dokes, Deb pulling the trigger in that shipping yard. Along the way, LaGuerta becomes the control case, the one person who sees him clearly and refuses to make that compromise, and dies for it. Rewatch the Bay Harbor Butcher arc, the Travis Marshall case, and that final season with LaGuerta's eyes in mind. How many of Dexter's plans only work because someone else chooses denial over clarity? Which near failure felt most inevitable to you? The church with Travis, the Estrada setup, or the shipping yard? Tell us in the comments, and point to the exact scene where you think Dexter's illusion of control truly collapses. Next, we'll break down more moments where Dexter's carefully engineered life implodes under real pressure. Because in the end, his greatest adversaries are not the killers he hunts, but the people, like LaGuerta, who insist on seeing him exactly as he is.